You've been told to let go, but no one told you how. They said, just breathe, just relax, just stop thinking so much, as if peace was a button you could press. But if that worked, why do your thoughts still race at night? Why does your chest still feel heavy with things you can't fix, people you can't forget, and versions of yourself you can't seem to forgive? You close your eyes, but your mind stays open, gripping old memories, clinging to regrets, replaying scenes that ended long ago. You're not broken. You're just holding on to control, to stories, to a self you think must hold everything together. But tonight, something different happens, not because you force it, but because you finally understand. In Buddhist wisdom, there's no enemy greater than clinging, and no greater relief than seeing that what you cling to was never solid to begin with. Not your thoughts, not your identity, not even your pain. They're like clouds, and you are not the storm. As you listen tonight, those heavy thoughts will start to float. The tension in your body will soften, your breath will deepen, and little by little, the need to hold on will fade until there's only space, quiet, stillness. You won't just fall asleep, you'll fall free. Are you ready? Let's begin. Before we begin, let this moment stretch out like a quiet pause in your heart. You don't need to go anywhere. You don't need to be anyone. There's no task left to finish tonight. No version of yourself you need to improve or perform. What's coming next isn't a lesson to memorize, but something your deeper self already knows. It's simply been buried beneath years of becoming. Let these words bring it back to the surface. Buddhist teachings speak of fetters, mental chains that keep us tied to suffering, not with locks or loud noise, but with subtle attachments that are easy to miss because they feel so normal. The most quiet ones, the ones we barely notice, are often the strongest. They're not made of metal, they're made of thought, they're made of self. There are 10 fetters, and they bind us to the cycle of suffering, of rebirth, of becoming. But there is one that is so hidden, so deeply woven into our minds, that it's rarely seen for what it is: identity clinging. The belief that I am this, that this is who I am, that this is how things must be. It starts early. Long before you had language for it, something inside was already shaping itself. A sense of me slowly forming around praise and punishment, around being seen and unseen. You were told you were good or bad, smart or slow, strong or weak. And those labels started to stick, not just as descriptions, but as truths, as boundaries, as chains. And from there, life became a series of moments trying to confirm that identity or fight against it, trying to become someone, trying to be better than who you were, or trying to hold tightly to who you thought you had to be. Even the so-called spiritual self can become another mask we wear, another layer of self-concept, another layer of becoming. The Buddha called this clinging to Sakkaya Ditthi, identity view, the belief in a permanent self, a core me that is unchanging. But if you look closely, really look, you'll see that everything you call me is always shifting. Thoughts arise and fall, moods change, bodies age, names change, beliefs evolve. So where is the you in all of that? This doesn't mean you're nothing. It means you are not one fixed thing. You're not the image in the mirror. You're not the story in your mind. You're not your habits, your history, or your plans. Your awareness watching it all. And even that, if held on to, becomes another subtle identity. The observer, the one who watches. Even that must be released. The trap is subtle. You think you've let go, but then a quiet pride grows. I'm someone who's learned to let go. Another layer, another becoming. Identity clinging hides in the background. It makes you overreact when someone criticizes you, not because of what they said, but because it shook the self you've built. It's why you feel threatened when your beliefs are questioned. It's why praise feels good, but never quite enough. Because at the core, the self that wants to be seen will never feel fully satisfied. It's made of emptiness, pretending to be solid. When you begin to let go of identity clinging, life softens. You no longer have to win every argument. You don't need to be the best at anything. You stop trying to be right all the time and instead become curious. You stop performing. You stop trying to belong by pretending. You just are. That freedom is lightness. It's rest. It's peace. But don't confuse this with passivity. Letting go of identity doesn't mean becoming dull or indifferent. It means being deeply alive without grasping, responding without reacting, acting without the burden of, I must be seen this way. You can still love, still create, still show up, but the tightness around being someone, that dissolves, and with it, suffering begins to fade. Identity clinging also fuels comparison, because when you believe you're a fixed self, you will constantly measure yourself against others. Their success feels like your failure. Their beauty makes you feel invisible. Their joy becomes your insecurity. But when the sense of self lightens, so does the need to compete. Suddenly, someone else's light doesn't dim yours. It adds to it. This clinging also feeds regret. The idea that I should have been different, it holds you in stories that can't be rewritten. But when identity softens, you begin to see that even the past wasn't as fixed as you thought. You were changing even then. You're not the same person who made that mistake. That person existed, and now they don't. Just like every moment, gone as soon as it arrives. You also start to see that the person you're trying to become doesn't exist either. The future self, wiser, calmer, more successful, is only an image, a mental movie. And just like the past, it's always changing. Clinging to becoming keeps you from fully resting in the present. And this moment, this breath, is the only place peace lives. Even suffering becomes more workable when you release identity. Pain still arises. But now it's not my pain or my problem. It's just pain. It's just sensation. It passes through you like wind through an open window. It doesn't define you. It doesn't mark you. It just is. Clinging to identity can also show up in subtle ways. In your roles. You think you are the helper, the strong one, the victim, the peacemaker. But those are just masks. Useful in some moments, harmful in others. When you cling to a role, you limit your response. You stop seeing clearly. You only act according to your script, not according to what this moment actually needs. To let go of identity is to let go of the need to be understood a certain way. It is to give up the constant project of self-maintenance. It's to stop asking the world to mirror back a version of you. Because you're no longer chasing a reflection, you're resting in what you've always been. Open, aware, and free. Letting go of identity also frees you from blame. When something bad happens, you don't need to find someone to blame, not even yourself, because it's no longer personal, it's just cause and effect. Conditions arising, there is space for compassion, for wise action, but not for tightness or shame. Many spiritual seekers fall into the trap of turning their journey into another identity. I am a meditator, I am a seeker, I am awakened. But each of these can become armor. Quiet ego, subtle clinging. Even your pain can become identity. I am the one who was hurt. And so you carry it longer than you need to. This doesn't mean denying what happened. It means not turning it into who you are. Because when you do, you give pain a permanent home. But pain wants to pass. And so does joy and everything else. Holding on turns passing clouds into permanent storms. Letting go also means allowing others to change. When we cling to our identity, we cling to others' identities too. We trap them in past versions of themselves. We judge them by one action. We keep their mistakes alive. But when you loosen identity, you give others room to grow. You see them freshly, moment by moment, and that's real love. Love without a story. This practice also softens fear. When you cling to a fixed self, death becomes terrifying, because it threatens the me you've built. But if there's no fixed self to lose, what is there to fear? Death becomes not an end, but a change in form, a return, a release. That's why letting go of identity is not cold, it's gentle. It's not about erasing yourself, it's about seeing clearly, about loosening the grip, about dropping the mask, not the heart. You become more connected, not less, more open, not numb, because now you're meeting life as it is, not through the filter of who you think you're supposed to be. So, how do we do this? Not through force, not by rejecting yourself, but by watching, by noticing, by sitting in stillness and observing how the sense of self arises and changes. Notice the voice in your mind that says, I am this, or I am not that. Watch how it shifts depending on the situation, the people, the mood. That fluidity is your clue. The self is not fixed, it's constructed. And what is constructed can be unconstructed. Meditation helps not because it makes you better, but because it shows you what's already true. Thoughts come and go, feelings rise and fall, labels appear and dissolve. The more you watch, the more the illusion softens, not all at once, slowly, naturally. And the more you let go, the more space opens. Not empty space, but peaceful space. A space where you can breathe, where nothing has to happen, where you are enough, not because of who you are, but because you stopped needing to be anything. This is not about withdrawal, it's about wise engagement. You can still act in the world, still care, still create, but you do it with a light touch, without needing to prove, defend, or cling. You become like water, flowing, flexible, clear. Letting go of identity also frees your energy. So much of your effort goes into holding up the idea of you. What happens when that's not necessary? You relax, you come alive, you can laugh more easily, cry more freely, rest more deeply, because you are no longer at war with yourself. And that, right there, is the essence of this teaching. You are not a thing. You are a happening, a moment, a breath. There's nothing to defend, nothing to hold. And in that realization is the peace you've been chasing. Not because you became someone new, but because you finally stopped becoming. And so, when all clinging to self begins to loosen, when even the subtle idea of me no longer has the power to shape our thoughts, what remains? When identity dissolves like salt in water and nothing inside says, "This is who I am," there is a kind of silence. Not just the quiet of a calm room, but the stillness of the mind that no longer needs to become anything at all. But even here, something can remain, a final thread, the desire to transcend, the craving to awaken, a grasping not for status, not for ego, but for freedom itself. And that too must go. What we now touch is not ordinary release, it is the release without residue. Anupadisesa Nibbana. This is the deepest letting go, beyond even the desire to let go. It's not emotional detachment. It's not the escape of someone numbed by life. It is total liberation from becoming, craving, clinging, and even from the subtle wish for attainment. Because as long as something is wished for, something is still held. Many people think of nirvana as a kind of bliss, a heavenly state where pain no longer touches you. But that idea is still built on wanting peace, wanting pleasure, wanting an outcome. But nirvana, in its final and most complete form, is the end of wanting anything at all. Not through suppression, but through understanding, a knowing so deep, so clear, that it sees through the entire structure of craving. Not only craving for material things, but craving for enlightenment, craving to be free, craving to arrive. This might seem confusing at first. How can the wish to be free be a trap? Isn't it natural to want liberation? Yes, it is. And in the beginning, that desire serves as a doorway. It pulls you into practice. It helps you endure discomfort. It keeps you on the path. But there comes a point where even this desire is a form of fuel, and as long as the fire is fed, it keeps burning. The craving to awaken can be noble, but it still binds you to the idea that there's something to reach, something to gain, some you that will one day arrive. And this is where the deeper work begins. Anupadisesa Nibbana points to the cessation of even that. Not because it's wrong to seek awakening, but because true awakening includes the realization that there is nothing to attain, no one to attain it, and nowhere to arrive. Liberation is not something added to you. It's what remains when everything false falls away, including the one chasing it. This is not a mystical claim. It's a profound simplicity. In everyday life, you can already see hints of it. Think of the moments where you are fully present, not seeking, not resisting. No thought about before or after, no inner commentary. In those brief spaces, there's peace, not because something was achieved, but because nothing was added. That stillness is a glimpse, but in full awakening, it is unbroken. It is no longer an experience, it is the end of needing experience. the ending of all needing. And this is why the teachings warn us not to mistake the path for the end. The Buddha spoke of two kinds of nirvana, one with residue, when awakening occurs but the body and mind still function, and one without residue, after the final death of an arahant, when there is no rebirth, no remainder, no holding, no fuel left for becoming. This second is anupadisesa nibbana. The mind has let go of everything, even itself. This is not annihilation, it's not nihilism, it's not the destruction of a soul, because in Buddhism there was never a soul to begin with. There was only movement, conditioned arising, appearances mistaken for a person. What ceases is not a being, but the illusion of being. And so the fear many people have when they hear this, that they will disappear, is based on a misunderstanding. What disappears is delusion. What ceases is suffering. And the beauty of this teaching is that it doesn't demand belief. It asks for direct seeing. Start right where you are. Notice how even spiritual effort can become a weight. How the desire to progress turns into anxiety. How you might think, I should be further along. Why am I still stuck? All of these thoughts are built on becoming, the mind that always says, I'm not there yet. But what if you stopped? Not out of laziness, but out of deep trust. Trust that you don't need to build a better self. You need to see through the idea of self altogether. The work is not about polishing the mirror. It's about realizing the reflection isn't real. And the more you look, the more clearly that becomes. You start to see that every effort to fix yourself reinforces the belief that you are broken. But you were never broken, just misidentified. Even effort itself can become a clinging. This doesn't mean give up. It means shift how you practice. Stop chasing states. Stop comparing progress. Return to silence, to stillness, to awareness without commentary. Allow the mind to settle without grasping at peace. Let peace come, not as something gained, but as the natural result of no longer resisting. This is why many advanced practitioners say the path becomes more about subtraction than addition. In the beginning, we learn techniques, frameworks, and discipline. These are helpful. They bring clarity. But eventually, even those are released, like climbing a mountain and dropping your tools once you reach the summit. They served their purpose, but to keep carrying them would be unnecessary. The Buddha once said, the Dhamma is like a raft. You use it to cross the river. But once you've crossed, you don't strap the raft to your back and carry it through the forest. That would be foolish. In the same way, even the most sacred practices are eventually let go. Not with disrespect, but with understanding. They were never the goal, they were the means. What remains is silence. Not the absence of sound, the absence of disturbance. A mind that no longer shakes in the wind. A heart that doesn't contract around gain or loss. This is what the texts mean when they describe Nibbana as the unconditioned. Everything else is conditioned, dependent on causes. But the cessation of craving is not a result in the usual sense. It's what's revealed when all causes for suffering end. In everyday language, this can be hard to grasp, but in practice, you can taste it. When you stop chasing experience, even for a moment, there's a quiet clarity. When you stop needing to know, to be right, to defend your view, something softens. When you stop seeking meaning in identity or future rewards, you become present in a way that feels effortless. That presence is the beginning of release. And yet, the ego is clever. It can turn even non-seeking into a new identity, a new goal, a new project. Now, I will be the one who doesn't cling. And so we cling to non-clinging. Crave non-craving. Chase the end of chasing. It's subtle, but it's still becoming. The only way through is to let awareness deepen without ownership. Let insight arise without claiming it. Let peace come without making it yours. When something shifts inside, don't say, "I am more awake." Say nothing. Let the process unfold without grabbing it. The moment you name it, you've frozen it. You've made it into something separate. That's the moment to let go again. There's also a tendency to seek permanent safety. The mind wants something it can hold on to forever. It wants nibbana to be a kind of heaven, a place of eternal light and bliss. But that's just more conditioned thinking. The real freedom lies in the absence of needing permanence. When nothing needs to last, every moment is free. And perhaps the most radical part of this teaching is that even the concept of freedom is surrendered. Not that you become trapped again, but that the very need to define things as free or not free fades away. There's no more measuring, no more checking, no more tracking progress, just a natural ease. The path has ended not because it stopped, but because the walker disappeared. This is not something to be forced. The mind that's still entangled will try to rush. It will want instant awakening. But there is no instant here. Time itself becomes a story. Awakening is not about a future moment. It's about the falling away of the belief in time altogether. In this, the mind rests deeply, fully. So when you hear that anupadisesa nibbana is the end of the path, know this. It's not the end in the way the mind imagines. It's not the end of being alive or feeling joy or participating in life. It's the end of clinging, the end of need, the end of the illusion that there was ever a separate self to suffer or attain. And it's here, in this understanding, that the greatest peace is found. Not as a reward, not as a prize, but as the natural state that was always beneath the noise, always waiting, always present, like the clear sky behind passing clouds. What disappears is not you. What disappears is the one who believed they were separate, the one who grasped, the one who feared, and what remains is not a thing, not a state, not a conclusion. What remains is what never began, what was never born, what cannot be described or defined, and in that, everything is already complete. Even peace, once grasped, becomes a burden. Even truth, once possessed, becomes distorted. In the stillness left by the falling away of craving, even the craving for freedom, something unexpected can arise. The impulse to hold on to the very path that pointed the way. The teachings, which served like a bridge over troubled water, start to feel sacred in themselves. And that, too, becomes a trap. There is a story the Buddha told about a man who uses a raft to cross a dangerous river. When he reaches the other side, he wonders whether to carry the raft on his back, out of gratitude. The Buddha's answer was clear. Let it go. The raft served its purpose. Carrying it now only slows you down. This is what is meant by clinging to the Dhamma. the path, the practices, the teachings, not the rejection of them, but the inability to release them when their job is done. When the mind holds even wisdom too tightly, it becomes just another form of attachment. Useful medicine turns to poison when it's consumed beyond the cure. One of the most direct teachings about this comes in the Alagadupama Sutta, the simile of the snake. The Buddha warned that just as someone who grabs a snake the wrong way will get bitten, someone who grasps the teachings without understanding will be harmed. The Dhamma is subtle. It points beyond words, beyond concepts. If we hold on to the words, thinking they are the truth themselves, we miss what they were pointing to. This is why the teachings are called a finger pointing to the moon. The finger is not the moon. To mistake the teachings for the thing itself is like worshipping the signpost instead of walking the path. Yet this happens often. The mind, once freed from worldly clinging, looks for safety in spiritual forms. It begins to identify with views, with rituals, with ideas. And even though these ideas may be profound, they are still ideas, not the living reality of awakening. There are many ways this clinging to Dhamma appears. One is through intellectual obsession. A person becomes fascinated by scriptures, lineages, debates. They quote suttas and argue over interpretations. But the heart remains untouched. The teachings become armor. The mind becomes sharp, but the insight remains shallow. In seeking to master the Dhamma, they forget to be mastered by it. Another form is rigid attachment to techniques, a certain meditation method, a specific sequence, a belief in one right way. These can all be helpful when applied with flexibility, but when held tightly, they turn into barriers. The practice becomes mechanical, joyless. Progress is measured by compliance instead of freedom. And the original spirit of inquiry, that open, curious mind, is replaced by fear of doing it wrong. Some practitioners even cling to the idea of not clinging. They become attached to detachment. They try to reject pleasure, connection, emotion, not from wisdom, but from fear. In doing so, they disconnect from life. They confuse coldness with equanimity. But true freedom isn't about numbness. It's about intimacy with all things, without fear of loss. Detachment that is held like a shield is still clinging, just with a different name. There is also a danger in identifying as a follower of the path. The label itself becomes part of the self. I am a meditator. I am a practitioner. I am a disciple of the Buddha. This can foster discipline and motivation, but it can also harden the ego. When we hold too tightly to our spiritual identity, we start to separate. We create distance between ourselves and those we perceive as not yet awake. Pride appears in disguise. Humility fades. Clinging to teachings can even arise in the relationship with the teacher. Reverence can become dependency. Gratitude can become idolization. And instead of using the teacher's guidance to turn inward, the student begins to orbit around the teacher's personality. The Dhamma is forgotten, replaced with loyalty to form. True teachers point you back to your own clarity. They remind you, do not cling to me. Do not build another self around devotion. This clinging can also hide in the desire for certainty. The teachings provide structure, answers, a way of understanding the world. But if we cling to them as unchanging truth, we resist the very nature of the path, which is based on impermanence, uncertainty, and direct experience. The Buddha himself warned against turning his words into dogma. He said to test the teachings like gold, not by blind faith, but by practice. And still, the mind loves to hold on to views, even views about non-self, emptiness, and impermanence. The teachings point to freedom, but they are not the freedom itself. They are strategies, tools, skillful means. The moment we believe the Dhamma is a fixed truth, we stop looking, we start defending, and we lose the spirit of the path, which is to know for yourself, directly, in silence, in stillness. To be clear, the Dhamma is not the problem. The problem is how the mind uses it. When the teachings are used with wisdom, they guide us. When they are grasped with ego, they bind us. The same fire that warms can burn if mishandled. That's why the Buddha emphasized right view, not rigid view. Right view is a starting point, not an end point. It is meant to be seen through like a window, not worshipped like a wall. Even the most beautiful teachings, compassion, mindfulness, liberation, can become ornaments if we're not careful, worn like badges, repeated like mantras, but never felt deeply, never lived. And this is the key. The Dhamma is not meant to be admired. It's meant to be embodied. The words are there to help you see. Once you see, the words fall away. This is why silence becomes so important in the later stages of the path. Not as absence, but as maturity. A silence that isn't empty. It's full of understanding. When insight deepens, the need to speak about it fades. The mind stops needing to name things. It trusts direct experience. It rests in knowing without clinging to knowledge. In this silence, even the Dhamma dissolves, not in disrespect, but in fulfillment. The teachings dissolve the way a map dissolves when the terrain is fully known. No more pointing, no more seeking, just the simplicity of presence. The body breathes, the heart opens, awareness remains, and there is no one left to hold it. And yet, life continues. Walking happens, speaking happens, eating, laughing, listening, all continue. But the clinging is gone. There is no one trying to be spiritual, no one trying to hold on to purity, just a flowing, just a naturalness that cannot be claimed. This freedom includes everything and excludes nothing. It doesn't reject teachings, but it no longer clings to them. It doesn't resist form, but it no longer depends on it. It bows to the path and then steps off of it, not to leave the path behind, but because the path has become the ground. And still, there may be a pull, the old pattern of grasping, the desire to hold on to the stillness, the insight, the clarity. But even this can be seen, and when it's seen, it doesn't need to be fought. It simply fades. Again and again, the hand relaxes, the heart opens, the weight drops. The Buddha's words are not chains, they are keys, but the keys only work when they're used, not when they're framed and admired. Use them, trust them, but do not carry them once the door is open. Walk through, and do so lightly. In the end, freedom is not something we define. It is what remains when definition ends. And even the Dhamma, sacred, powerful, wise, must be surrendered in that final silence. That is not betrayal. That is completion. There's a tenderness to this, a humility. We see the effort, the striving, the learning, all of it, and bow, grateful, not clinging. The teachings brought us home, and now we simply rest there. No identity to hold, no future to chase, no truth to defend, no path to walk. Just this, always just this. And so, when even the teachings have been laid down, when the words that pointed the way are no longer needed, what else remains to be released? Often it's the most virtuous things that are hardest to let go of. Not because they are wrong, but because they are praised, because they seem to shine, because they feel good to the mind that wants to be good. One of the most overlooked forms of clinging is not to wealth or power, but to goodness itself, to the quiet pride of spiritual progress, to the record of generous acts, to the subtle weight of accumulated merit. This kind of attachment wears a peaceful face. It looks like kindness, it sounds like humility, but underneath it something tight is still working. A calculation, a desire to store good karma, to bank enough purity to earn a future reward. This is the paradox. Striving to be good, to do good, to generate merit, can itself become a subtle grasping, a new identity, a quiet self built out of virtue. The Buddha taught about generosity, ethical conduct, and the cultivation of wholesome qualities. These are part of the path. But he also warned that attachment to any action, even a wholesome one, can sustain the sense of self. Doing good, when used skillfully, leads to peace. But when it becomes another way to build a story, I am someone who gives, I am someone who has earned, it reinforces the very thing the path is meant to dissolve. Merit, or punya, is often seen as a spiritual currency. Accumulate enough, and you earn good conditions in this life or the next. Acts of kindness, offerings, prayers, self-restraint, these are seen as steps towards something better. But if they are done with the motivation of getting, even if it's getting peace or enlightenment, they become bound by the same craving the teachings ask us to abandon. Merit-making becomes dangerous, not because it's unwholesome, but because it can be used to decorate the self. The mind may begin to compare. I've done more than others. Or it may worry, have I done enough? These are signs of attachment, not to the act, but to what the act is believed to achieve, to the imagined results, to the image of oneself as a virtuous person. Even subtle pride can bind the heart. The feeling of being more awake, more aware, more humble than others is still a form of elevation. It may not be loud, but it separates. It defines. It quietly whispers, "Look at me, becoming free." And in that moment, freedom is postponed. The most sincere practice begins to bend when it is done for accumulation, for record-keeping, when the motivation is rooted in outcome rather than clarity, when the focus shifts from presence to achievement. When one's goodness becomes a transaction with the universe, the spirit contracts. Life becomes a ledger, not a flow. In early stages of practice, the accumulation of merit has value. It softens the heart, inclines the mind toward kindness, and opens the door to deeper inquiry. But it is not the destination. The Buddha taught that even merit is impermanent, conditioned, dependent on causes. It is shaped by intention. And if the intention is bound by craving, even noble craving, the result is still entangled. This doesn't mean stop doing good, it means stop clinging to goodness. Let the action be enough in itself, not a step on a staircase. A kind word, a shared meal, a moment of silence. These don't need to become trophies. Let them pass. Let them ripple outward without needing to trace their return. This also applies to the idea of spiritual progress. Many people carry a hidden hunger for recognition, not from others, but from the cosmos, a desire to be seen by existence as worthy. This is still ego, still self, still the need to be acknowledged, even if only silently. And so even acts of deep practice can become colored by this longing. The moment we begin tracking progress, we've reintroduced the measurer, the observer who watches the path, who calculates gains and losses, who secretly asks, "How far am I now?" This watcher is the same mind that clings, the same self-view in disguise. And so the purest moments come when action flows without echo, when the path is walked without measurement. Letting go of merit means walking not to earn, but to be empty, sitting not to gain peace, but because sitting happens. Speaking kindly, not to improve karma, but because kindness is the natural response. It means trusting the heart's unfolding without reward, without scoreboard, without tally. This also means seeing through the stories we tell about past virtue. I've already given so much. I've done my part. These ideas keep us tied to a narrative. They keep us holding an identity based on effort, but effort cannot be clung to. The past cannot hold the present, and the story of goodness must be released like every other story. True merit has no memory. The action is complete when the intention ends. What remains is the effect in the world, not the echo in the self. There's no need to hold it, no need to count. The giving dissolves once given. The kindness ends at the touch. That is its beauty, that it lives fully in the moment, not in the mind. This perspective doesn't reject the value of wholesome actions. It reveals a deeper way to relate to them, without ownership, without future bargaining, without tying the act to an imagined identity. This is not about being passive, it is about being clean in the action, pure in the moment, free from the need to gain. The deeper this understanding grows, the more naturally goodness flows. Not because we should, but because we can't help it. A tree gives fruit, not because it wants reward, but because it is full. And when our hearts are full, merit arises as a natural movement, not from strategy, but from stillness. This also means letting go of guilt. Many people carry a sense that they are not good enough, that they have not done enough, that they must earn their right to be peaceful. But peace is not earned, it is revealed. It arises when the need to earn dissolves, when the burden of being worthy falls away, when the heart stops trying to be anything other than what it is. Merit-based thinking can sometimes delay this. It whispers, "When I have been good enough, then I can rest." But rest is not a reward. It is your natural state, uncovered. You don't need to qualify for stillness. You need only stop chasing the reasons that keep you from it. This understanding also transforms how we see others. When we cling to our merit, we often judge the path of others. We look for signs of their virtue, we weigh their actions, we compare. But when we let go, judgment drops. We see others not as more or less evolved, but as fellow travelers. Different paths, different timing, same emptiness behind the forms. This also invites a gentler view of life's challenges. When merit is seen as currency, suffering can feel like punishment. We ask, what did I do wrong? But when the idea of accumulation falls away, we stop assigning blame. Suffering is no longer seen as a debt. It is seen as life, arising, unfolding, dissolving, not personal, just part of the flow. Letting go of merit also invites freedom from effort, not laziness, but naturalness. Effort that is clean, light, responsive, not tight, not calculated, not burdened with expectation. We do what is needed, not for gain, but because it is clear, because it feels right, because the heart is open. The deepest peace arises when nothing is held. Not goodness, not accomplishment, not future reward. Even the wish to be remembered can soften. The fear of being forgotten dissolves when we are no longer trying to prove our worth. When we live fully in presence, there's no need to be written into history. There's only the moment, blooming and fading, like everything else. This letting go is not a rejection of beauty. It is the release of ownership. The sunrise is still beautiful, even if we don't paint it. A life can be deeply meaningful, even if it leaves no monument. Merit is like fragrance, real, but not something to carry. It passes through, it touches others, and it fades. And when it fades, something quieter remains, not emptiness in the hollow sense, but spaciousness, a field where action arises without force, where life moves without being pushed, where goodness flows without needing to be called good. This is what the Buddha pointed to when he spoke of the highest kind of giving. Giving without thought of self, other, or gift. The action is done, and that's the end. No echo, no attachment, no merit clung to, just the freedom of a heart that has nothing to protect. In the end, freedom means nothing left to count, no deeds to polish, no record to keep. Not because we stop caring, but because we care from a place that is too deep to be measured. A place where silence is the offering, where the clean breath is enough, where the open hand gives without memory. And it is here, in this clean space beyond effort, that the most natural joy arises, not born of merit, but of rest, not from being better, but from no longer needing to be, a joy that is quiet, stable, and without need for reward. That is the paradox. In letting go of the desire to be good, real goodness flows. In giving up the chase for merit, the heart becomes full. In forgetting the path, we walk it without resistance. And in the absence of striving, we meet what we were always trying to reach, a peace that holds nothing and lacks nothing. When merit is released and the weight of spiritual accounting dissolves, something deeper starts to stir beneath the surface. A quieter kind of heaviness. Not the weight of your own actions, but the stories you never chose. The ones passed down in silence. The ones you carry not because you made them, but because they were handed to you. Family patterns, ancestral echoes, emotional imprints that arrive long before understanding. These too must be seen. These too can be released. The Kulakama Vibhanga Sutta, a discourse spoken by the Buddha, presents a subtle but powerful truth. Not all suffering comes from this lifetime alone. Some of it is born from actions taken long ago. Not only our own actions, but the complex weave of karma that moves through families, cultures, and generations. Karma is not a punishment, nor a fate written in stone. It is movement. It is cause and effect, unfolding through time and mind. And like any pattern, it can be understood. When it's understood, it can be met with wisdom, and when it's met with wisdom, it can lose its grip. Many people live with a sense of emotional inheritance. They notice habits they didn't choose, reactions that feel automatic, fears that appear without clear reasons. There may be a family history of anxiety, conflict, silence, shame, or pride. These are not just memories. They are patterns repeated until they feel like truth, until they settle into the body like a second skin. Karma is not just what we do. It is also what we absorb, what we unconsciously continue, and what we must wake up to if we wish to be free. The Buddha did not deny the influence of past actions. He named it clearly. He explained that beings are born into different conditions, ease or hardship, health or illness, intelligence or confusion, because of actions committed in previous lives. But he also made something else very clear. No karma is final. Conditions shape us, but they do not trap us. We are not bound by our lineage, only affected by it. And those effects can be transformed. This is where mindfulness becomes more than presence. It becomes recognition. When we begin to observe our inner world with clarity, we start to see which parts of us are responses and which are repetitions. A reaction flares, and instead of being pulled into it, we ask, where did this begin? Is this mine, or is this inherited? Did I create this fear, or was I trained in it? Was this judgment born from experience, or handed down through belief? This inquiry isn't about blame. It's not about turning against our families or history. It's about softening the unconscious agreements we've been living under. Agreements to carry pain that isn't ours, agreements to repeat behavior that harms, agreements to define ourselves by the wounds of others. The moment we see them, we create space, and in that space there is choice. Karma loses power when it becomes conscious. What is unseen controls us. What is seen can be released. Even biological inheritance, though real, is only part of the story. What we call family karma often includes emotional silence, unspoken grief, fear of love, resistance to vulnerability, control disguised as care. These forms pass down not as rules, but as atmosphere. They train us through tone, through absence, through repetition, and until we pause and look directly, they become the script we perform without knowing. But seeing is not enough. The next step is responsibility, not for what happened, but for what we do with it now. It means honoring the pain we received without making it into our identity. It means holding the complexity of love and hurt without needing to simplify. It means forgiving not to excuse, but to let go of the desire for repayment. Forgiveness in this context is not passive. It's a radical act of untangling. This release also includes grief. Many people carry unresolved sorrow from what was missing. Care not given, connection not offered, trust broken. The mind may try to dismiss it with logic. They did their best. It wasn't that bad. but the body remembers, and healing requires feeling what was not felt. Not to dwell, but to digest, to let it pass through so it no longer defines the nervous system. Releasing ancestral karma also means softening our view of the past. Seeing our parents not just as parents, but as people, shaped by their own fears, their own inheritance, their own unmet needs. This doesn't erase harm, but it replaces the fixed image with a fuller picture. And when we stop expecting those who harmed us to also heal us, we reclaim our power. Healing becomes our responsibility, and that is the path to freedom. Sometimes what needs releasing is not pain, but protection. Patterns that were once useful, vigilance, control, withdrawal, may no longer serve. They helped us survive in environments that felt unsafe. But survival strategies become prisons when we don't update them. What protected the child may trap the adult. Mindfulness allows us to see when safety is no longer in danger and to loosen the armor that became unnecessary. Inherited burdens also shape how we see ourselves. We may carry shame that didn't start with us, guilt that belonged to someone else, beliefs about unworthiness handed down through looks, through silence, through rules never spoken. These hidden messages settle deep, but they are not truths. They are learned, and what is learned can be unlearned. The process of releasing doesn't mean we forget our roots. It means we stop being bound by them. It means becoming the end of a pattern rather than its continuation. To do this, we must be willing to feel what our ancestors could not, to name what they could not name, to heal what they never had the space to touch. This is not spiritual performance. It is quiet, difficult work, but it is sacred. The power of this process lies in understanding karma as dynamic. The Buddha didn't teach that our fate is sealed. He taught that karma is shaped in every moment, by thought, by speech, by action. The past influences us, but it does not decide us. The present mind, clear and awake, has the ability to respond differently, to break the cycle, to plant new seeds. This shift also changes how we relate to the future. When we stop carrying old burdens, we no longer need to pass them forward. We raise children with more presence, less projection. We speak with honesty instead of habit. We love without the weight of what was withheld from us. We become the turning point in a long line of repetition. That is merit too, the kind that cannot be measured. And it is not just personal. The patterns that shape us also move through society. Collective karma, cultural conditioning, the pain of communities passed down through silence and struggle. When we heal individually, we weaken the collective web of harm. We become more honest, less reactive, less likely to cause pain from pain, more likely to speak from wisdom. This is not about perfection. We will still carry some echoes. Some imprints are deep. But even when the pattern still arises, our relationship to it changes. It no longer owns us. It is no longer unconscious. We can bow to it without becoming it. We can feel it and let it pass. One of the deepest aspects of karma is how it shapes our sense of possibility. When we grow up inside limitation, we often assume it is truth. That love must hurt. That joy must be rare. That safety is an illusion. But these are not facts. They are impressions, and we are not bound to them. The Buddha's teaching in this discourse reminds us that we can change our trajectory. not through denial of the past, but through full awareness of it, through wise intention, through new action. This is the empowerment the Dhamma offers, not to erase our history, but to free us from its chains. And it begins in the present, with breath, with noticing, with naming what we once avoided, with allowing what was too heavy to feel, with choosing not to repeat what was unkind, with becoming aware of the quiet choices that shape tomorrow. This is how karma changes, not through ceremony alone, but through clarity, through meeting life with the heart fully awake, through small, consistent shifts in how we respond, through the courage to stand still when the old pattern says, run, through the softness to stay open when the old pattern says, close. Each moment of awareness becomes a break in the chain. Each compassionate act, a new direction. Each truth spoken, a shift in the line. We don't have to do it all at once. We only have to begin. And as we do, we may find that what felt like burden slowly becomes blessing, that the weight we carried becomes the wisdom we offer, that what was passed down through pain can now be passed forward as peace. There is no need to fix the past, only to meet the present fully, to honor the pain without being defined by it, to thank the lessons without staying in their shadows, to hold the story with tenderness and then to set it down. And when we do, something quiet opens, a sense of spaciousness, not empty, but clean, a place where the future is no longer shaped by fear, a place where the past is no longer running the show, a place where presence becomes home. This is the gift of release, not forgetting, not pretending, but the deep knowing that we are no longer bound, that we have seen and felt and softened, that we have broken the cycle with clarity, that we carry love, not pain, that we remember with peace, not burden, and that from this place the path continues, lighter, clearer, and truly free. After releasing the weight of generational pain and stepping out of inherited stories, what begins to reveal itself is not only clarity, but spaciousness. In that space, something subtle remains, something that still feels like you. It isn't the past, it isn't family, it's not even your name or history. It's quieter than identity and gentler than thought. It is the sense that there is a stable center within that observes everything else, the one who sees, the one who watches, the silent witness. For a time, it feels like freedom, but even this must be seen clearly. In many teachings and practices, becoming the observer is encouraged. It creates a gap between reaction and awareness. It softens identification with thoughts and emotions. It offers a sense of distance from the chaos of experience. And for those entangled in pain, this is a gift. To realize, I am not my anger, or I am not my sadness, is a liberating insight. It's the beginning of stepping out of suffering. But that's all it is, the beginning. At some point, even this I who watches becomes a construction. Subtle, yes. Peaceful, yes. But still a self. Still something owned. Still something held onto. The observer begins to feel like the final truth, but it is still within the field of experience. It still arises. It still depends on conditions. It is not as solid as it seems. The mind is clever in preserving itself. After letting go of roles, beliefs, stories, and even the idea of self, it will take refuge in what feels formless. It will say, I am not the body, I am the awareness of the body. I am not the thought, I am the space in which thought appears. These perspectives bring calm. They create separation from stress, but they also reintroduce a quiet sense of being someone who sees. The observer is a cleaner version of ego, refined, silent, but still present. This identity of the witness can remain unnoticed for years. It doesn't scream, it doesn't fight, but it holds its shape through spiritual language, through quiet pride, through the effort to remain present. It speaks softly. I am the one who does not get lost. I am the one who notices without judgment. These thoughts are subtle self-definitions. They divide experience into observer and observed. And where there is division, there is still clinging. True non-duality requires that even this line dissolves, not just the surface, but the subtle structure underneath. The idea that there is a center within awareness must be questioned, not denied, not rejected, but looked at with deep honesty. Where is this witness located? What shape does it have? When does it arise? If it can be found, if it can be described, then it too is part of the arising, not outside of it. The practice then becomes even more quiet. It is not about resting in the observer. It is about noticing that the observer also comes and goes. There are moments of intense clarity, and there are moments of total forgetting. If the observer were truly permanent, it would never leave. But it does. It fades when attention is pulled. It returns when the mind is steady. It changes depending on awareness. This means it is not ultimate. What happens when the observer is released? Experience remains. Sound, sight, sensation, thought, all still happen, but there is no longer a someone watching. Awareness is not missing, but there is no longer a sense of ownership within it. It is not being done by anyone. It is not being directed or claimed. It simply is. This dissolving is not annihilation. It is intimacy. Without the watcher, the division disappears. There is no space between awareness and what is seen. There is no distance between self and world. Experience unfolds with no reference point. The boundary falls, and what's left is full inclusion. There is often fear around letting go of the observer. It feels like the last refuge, the final safe place. To let it dissolve can feel like disappearing. But what disappears is only the illusion of control. What vanishes is the idea of a stable core within the flow. What remains is undivided knowing, not owned, not directed, not split. The reason this shift matters is because even the observer can suffer. The one who watches still desires clarity, still resists confusion, still subtly prefers peace. And those preferences shape experience. They filter what is seen. They select what is allowed. This selection, however gentle, is still tension. It creates effort. It maintains control. In deep release, there is no preference. Joy and grief appear with equal space. Movement and stillness are not in conflict. Confusion is not a problem. Clarity is not a goal. Everything that arises is seen without distance, not because a witness is choosing to allow it, but because the mechanism of choice itself is absent. And in that absence, something radical opens, not another state, not another realization, but the end of fragmentation, life as it is, whole and complete. No commentary, no center, no border, just this, undivided, unfiltered, unowned. This does not mean passivity. Actions still happen. Words are spoken, decisions are made, but they arise from clarity, not from a manager within. The idea that I must observe myself to stay aligned is replaced with a naturalness that needs no monitor. It is a return to the original simplicity, where awareness is not directed, but effortless, where presence is not maintained, but constant. This also changes how effort is understood. In earlier practice, effort is required to remain mindful. Attention must be redirected. The mind must be brought back. But once the observer dissolves, there is no struggle to be present. Awareness is no longer something to maintain. It is simply the ground, the background, the space in which life unfolds, unclaimed. Even spiritual practice begins to soften. There is less need to watch thoughts, to analyze reactions, to track progress. Practice becomes more about resting in openness than fixing anything. Less doing, more being, less seeking, more trust. Trust that without a watcher, nothing is lost. Trust that awareness doesn't need to be managed. This shift also transforms compassion. As long as there is an observer, compassion can remain conceptual. I see your pain. I choose to be kind. But when the observer dissolves, separation dissolves. Compassion is no longer a choice. It is the natural expression of no distance, of direct connection, of love without an observer. This intimacy with experience also includes the body. With no one watching, sensation becomes more vivid. There is no filter, no one deciding what to feel. The body becomes an open field, alive, responsive, grounded. Movement arises not from decision, but from need. Rest, gesture, stillness, all unfold in harmony with the moment. Thoughts also change texture. Without an observer naming them, they lose sharpness. They pass through like clouds, not narratives. They arise and vanish without echo. There is no one holding them, no one pushing them away, no one turning them into identity. Thinking becomes softer, quieter, not always, but often. And even when it's busy, it's not personal. Language becomes simpler. The need to explain, to describe, to be understood relaxes. There is less interest in convincing, in performing, in appearing wise. Words become tools, not extensions of self. Communication becomes clearer. There is no one inside trying to be heard. Just speech, offered freely. Relationships deepen too. Without a watcher managing interaction, there is more presence. Listening becomes whole. Eye contact becomes connection, not monitoring. Silence is no longer awkward. Boundaries arise naturally, not from calculation, but from direct knowing, from trust in what the moment calls for. This dissolving also touches memory. Without an observer cataloging experience, the need to remember everything fades. The past becomes lighter, less sticky, less personal. There is no one building a story, no one collecting moments. Memory arises when needed, but it no longer defines. Future also softens. Planning happens when necessary, but it's not driven by control. There is less obsession with outcome, less anxiety about what will be. The observer who used to prepare, predict, and rehearse is no longer active, and so the mind relaxes. The heart opens. Life is lived in real time. Even suffering, when it arises, is met differently. Without an observer labeling it, pain is no longer a problem. It is sensation. It is emotion. It is energy. It moves. It shifts. It's not resisted. It's not owned. There is no one caught in it, and so it passes more easily. It is felt fully, but not stored. This does not mean the mind never speaks. Thoughts still appear, concepts still form, but they are seen for what they are. Movements within the field, not messages from a self, not signals from a watcher. Just appearance, just sound, just movement, not to be grasped. And when the observer is truly gone, what's left is not emptiness in a negative sense. It is fullness without edges, presence without shape, knowing without knower. It cannot be described without reducing it, but it can be lived, not as an experience, but as the natural unfolding of what always was. There is no final moment of dissolving. It happens in layers. The idea of self peels back, then returns, then softens again. The observer lets go, then reforms. This is not failure. It is the rhythm of unfolding. What matters is not holding on when it returns, not identifying, just seeing, just resting, just letting the tide come and go. This path is not about removing yourself. It is about seeing there was no self to begin with. Not to destroy, but to discover. Not to reject, but to relax. Into what already is. Awareness without boundary. Life without a center. Peace without a watcher. And in that simplicity, everything begins to feel whole, not because it changed, but because the one who stood apart has disappeared. There is no more separation, no more witness, just presence, just freedom, just this. When the mind no longer seeks a center, when even the observer dissolves into silence, and when the pull to continue dissolves into a steady relinquishment of becoming, there can arise a rare clarity. Yet from that stillness, something gentle may whisper again. A faint hope, a subtle curiosity, the soft pull of continuation in a different form. It is not loud or desperate. It doesn't demand. It simply lingers. The wish for one more chance, a better life, a finer rebirth. Even in letting go, the mind can still long for existence. This is where samsara shows its most delicate face, not through suffering, but through seduction. The cycle of becoming does not always wear the form of pain. Often it appears as beauty, opportunities to return, to relive, to refine what was unfinished, to perfect what was broken, to continue loving what feels precious, to reach some future version of awakening or truth or joy. The mind tells a quiet story, that the next moment, the next body, the next lifetime will be clearer, wiser, more whole, that the path continues, that there's still something more to experience, to know, to become. This, too, is attachment. Rebirth is often misunderstood as a reward for virtue, a continuation of progress, or a stage for spiritual completion. But in the Buddha's teachings, rebirth is neither punishment nor reward. It is merely the result of conditions. It is fueled by what remains unfinished, the craving that continues to move the mind forward, seeking stability in impermanent forms. Even a birth into blissful realms is not final. No realm, no matter how radiant, is beyond change. All of them pass. What arises will cease. Even joy cannot last forever if it depends on causes. This is why the Buddha did not point toward heaven as the goal. He pointed toward release. He did not encourage becoming again and again, but rather the end of becoming. This is not rejection, it is wisdom. It is the deep knowing that the cycle, however beautiful its forms, is unstable, and what is unstable cannot be relied upon. There are many types of rebirth described in the teachings: realms of suffering, realms of desire, realms of form, and formless realms of vast peace. But all of them, without exception, are conditioned. The body may be different, the mind more subtle, the lifespan longer, the joy more refined, but the nature of samsara remains. It continues because the desire for existence continues. The attachment may evolve, becoming more subtle, more spiritual, but it remains the same fuel. This subtle attachment is not always easy to recognize. In early practice, the mind sees the obvious: the craving for pleasure, the fear of loss, the need to be seen. But deeper in, the attachment to becoming appears in spiritual language. It speaks of Dharma missions, bodhisattva vows, cosmic purpose. It wraps itself in compassion, in service, in progress. And yet, it quietly insists on future, on identity, on survival through roles. To see this clearly requires deep honesty. It requires a willingness to sit with the discomfort of not continuing, the discomfort of not becoming, the discomfort of cessation. The desire to return must be observed without feeding it, not pushed away, not indulged, but known as it is, a form of clinging. The mind must grow steady enough to stand in front of this longing and not move. This work also means seeing that suffering doesn't end just because one is reborn in a favorable state. The tendencies of the mind follow, the old patterns resurface, fear still visits, desire still arises. Even in celestial realms, beings fall. They are not immune to loss. Their pleasure is temporary, their lives are long, but not eternal. And when those lifespans end, beings fall to other realms based on the residual tendencies still unpurified. This is not a story meant to frighten. It is a lesson in impermanence. To become again is to begin again. To begin again is to re-enter the cycle. There is no safe place within samsara, no final refuge within the conditioned world. No experience, no realm, no attainment can serve as permanent rest if it depends on arising conditions. The craving for rebirth also hides in the wish to leave a legacy, to be remembered, to continue through influence, teachings, creations, or lineages. But even this desire must be seen clearly. Legacy is a kind of echo, a lingering form of self, a soft craving to leave a mark. But all marks fade, all echoes disappear, all stories eventually dissolve. Releasing this longing is not despair, It is freedom from needing continuity to feel complete. Letting go of rebirth also brings up fear. Fear of disappearing, of being nothing, of losing awareness. But the Buddha never taught that release meant annihilation. He taught that what ceases is clinging, what ends is suffering. The fear of not existing is based on the belief in a self that exists. When that belief fades, the fear fades with it. Awareness is not destroyed. The compulsion to become is what falls away. There is also a common view that awakening leads to rebirth in pure lands or luminous realms of enlightened beings. These ideas are often misunderstood as final destinations. But in the original teachings, full awakening ends the cycle altogether. No more arising, no more becoming, no more rebirth. Not because something is taken away, but because nothing remains that would continue. The mind no longer fuels the process. There is no thirst left to sustain it. The practice of renunciation, then, is not about turning away from joy or from life. It is about no longer needing it to feel whole. It is about seeing clearly that peace cannot come from what changes. That true security is found only in what does not depend on time, form, or continuity. That kind of peace is not built, it is uncovered. When the craving to become is gone, what remains is stable, untouched, free. This path also asks for subtle patience. The craving for rebirth may not vanish in a single moment. It may return in different forms. It may appear as service, as hope, as longing for another chance. But each time it arises, it can be seen more clearly, not judged, not indulged, just gently released. Again and again, the hand that reaches can open. The teachings also offer a powerful reflection. Birth leads to death. Wherever there is becoming, there will be aging, loss, and ending. This is not negativity. It is the deepest honesty. And when this is accepted fully, the mind begins to quiet. The need for stories fades. The desire for movement slows. The value of each moment increases, not because it must return, but because it need not. The Buddha's path invites a shift from narrative to presence, from future to now, from becoming to being, and then from being to the dissolving of even that, not through force, but through deep seeing, through no longer needing to be anything at all. This view also dissolves the trap of spiritual progression as identity. Many practitioners secretly imagine future lifetimes of increasing wisdom, higher forms, more refined minds. But this is just spiritualized becoming. The path is not about accumulating subtle selves. It is about releasing the compulsion to construct them at all. Even the desire to meet loved ones again, to return and finish karmic work, can be seen as gentle forms of clinging. Love does not need rebirth to be real. Completion does not require continuation. What is unfinished in one life does not need to be solved in another. Peace does not wait at the end of repetition. It waits in the end of craving. To see this is to realize the courage required for complete renunciation, not rejection of life, but the full willingness to not return, to let all formations pass, to let all names fade, to release the cycle not because it is wrong, but because it cannot provide what does not end. This understanding softens ambition. It loosens the need to grow endlessly. It stops the pursuit of better versions. It ends the quiet hunger for one more try. And in that ending, a different kind of fullness arises, a stillness that needs nothing, a joy that isn't based on gain, a completeness that comes from not continuing. That is the heart of liberation, not existence refined, not rebirth perfected, but craving ended. No more seeds planted, no more roots clinging, no more becoming. And from that ground, action becomes effortless. Service becomes spontaneous. Compassion flows without identity. Life moves through form, but nothing claims it. There is no I that needs to return. Just presence doing what it does and passing like a breeze through a field. The ending of rebirth is not the end of aliveness. It is the end of ownership, the end of fuel, the end of cycles made by thirst. And in its place, stillness. In its place, peace. This is what the Buddha pointed to again and again, the path not of more life, but of no more clinging to life, the path not of endless rising, but of final rest. To walk this path is to let even the beautiful go, to stop hoping for better, to stop fearing endings, to rest finally in the deepest release. No more birth, no more becoming, no more return, just peace, simple, unshaken, free. When the fires cool and the mind stops grasping, a new depth of stillness begins to open. No longer reacting with craving or aversion, the heart begins to settle into subtler layers of perception. Experience becomes clearer, more vivid, more spacious. But within that clarity lies another hidden pull, one that does not burn hot like desire or sting sharp like anger. It comes softly, almost sweetly, the lure of beauty, the pleasure of stillness, the rapture of sensation that does not harm but still holds. This is not craving in its ordinary form. It is the kind that enters quietly, wearing robes of light and peace. And because it feels good, it often goes unnoticed. The danger of beauty is not that it exists, but that it can become another resting place for attachment. Not all clinging is violent or obvious. Some of it arises through appreciation. When beauty is not understood, it seduces the heart into wanting. Not wanting in the usual sense of possession, but in the form of prolonged attention, the desire for continuation, the wish for what is pleasant to remain, the subtle sense that the moment is not enough unless it stays. This kind of attachment can happen anywhere, toward people, places, music, even silence, but it becomes particularly potent in meditation. As concentration deepens, the body settles, and the mind becomes unified. States of joy and rapture can arise. These states are often marked by warmth, brightness, or an intense feeling of pleasure flowing through the body. They are known as piti and sukha in the Buddhist tradition. And while they are wholesome and skillful to develop, they are not liberation. They are still formations, still impermanent, still not to be clung to. If a meditator is not careful, these states become the new goal. The practice becomes focused not on understanding, but on reproducing those feelings. Sessions are measured by whether the rapture returns. A silent craving forms around peace, around clarity, around inner beauty. This craving may feel harmless, even spiritual, but it binds the mind in the same way as grosser forms of desire. Beauty also captures through the senses in daily life. A face, a song, a natural scene. Even ideas can carry beauty, the beauty of elegant thought or of teachings that stir the heart. These encounters are not problematic until the mind begins to reach, until it assigns specialness, until it fears their loss. This reaching is what turns a passing moment into a fixed need, and that fixation, even when refined, is still bondage. The Buddha taught that whatever is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self must be seen as such, not just intellectually, but directly. When beauty arises and is met with understanding, it becomes a portal to insight. We see its arising, its peak, its fading. We watch the mind react. We notice the subtle leaning in, and in that awareness, the leaning can soften. But when beauty is met without clarity, the mind grasps. Even if the grasp is soft, it is still pressure, still formation, still becoming. This grasp doesn't only want more, it also fears loss. And fear is a sign that attachment has already taken root. In some cases, beauty becomes a kind of refuge. The meditator seeks the jhanic states not for insight, but for escape. The world feels heavy, and rapture becomes the place to hide. But clinging to pleasure, even refined pleasure, builds dependency. The mind begins to turn away from the ordinary. It becomes selective, only at ease in certain conditions. The natural flow of life, the full range of joy, pain, confusion, and clarity, feels intrusive. Practice becomes narrow. Letting go of sensory rapture does not mean rejecting it. It means meeting it fully, without making it into something personal, without building stories around it, without shaping identity from it. The state may arise. Let it. Enjoy its presence without owning it. When it fades, let it go without longing. This is how beauty is honored without becoming trapped by it. The danger also arises when beauty strengthens conceit. A practitioner may become identified with their ability to access deep states, with their capacity for calm or radiant experience. This identification reinforces the sense of self in subtle ways. It quietly says, "I am someone who has attained," and with that comes comparison, pride, subtle superiority, a craving not only for beauty, but for the image of being close to it. Clinging to beauty can also delay wisdom. Because rapture feels complete, the mind may lose interest in deeper inquiry. It rests in pleasant states without asking questions, without examining impermanence, without noticing suffering. Insight practice requires movement beyond comfort. It demands the courage to sit with what is unstable, unsatisfying, and impersonal. Beauty, when grasped, can become a wall to that truth. Even in the arts, beauty seduces. A well-crafted poem, a haunting melody, a piece of wisdom perfectly phrased. These can all become objects of attachment. They stir something deep, and that stirring is mistaken for truth. But if truth depends on form, it is not stable. The path does not reject art or sound or expression, but it asks us to see their nature, to enjoy without need, to let go without regret. There is also beauty in concepts, the elegance of a philosophy, the symmetry of a teaching. These intellectual forms can become attachments when they provide comfort rather than clarity. A belief, when beautiful, can be harder to question, but the Dharma is not based on how it sounds, it is based on what is real. Even the most inspiring idea must be tested against experience. If it cannot hold up to the truth of impermanence and non-self, it must be released. As dispassion grows, beauty is not denied, it is deepened. It is no longer a means to an end. It is simply what arises. The scent of a flower, the stillness of dusk, the rhythm of walking. These are no longer doorways to desire, they are expressions of the moment, complete as they are. No reaching, no clinging, just clear seeing. This clarity reveals that beauty is not in the object, but in the mind that meets it with awareness. When craving fades, everything becomes more beautiful, not because it changes, but because the mind is no longer seeking. The heart is open, and beauty flows through it, leaving no residue. There is no stickiness, no need to hold, just appreciation followed by release. Even spiritual language can be seductive. Words like grace, bliss, or awakening may carry emotional charge. They create expectations. The practitioner may begin to seek experiences that match these words, but no word can capture the simplicity of truth. If we cling to how awakening is described, we may miss its presence. It is not always radiant. Often it is quiet. Often it feels like nothing special. The beauty we imagine is not always the peace we find. The practice, then, is to see the moment clearly, not for its decoration, but for its nature, not for its charm, but for its truth. The pleasant and the unpleasant are both part of this field, the beautiful and the painful, the still and the restless. When none are preferred, all can be known. Letting go of sensory rapture also requires attention to intention. Why are we seeking beauty? What are we avoiding? What do we believe it will provide? These questions bring us closer to the core, closer to the heart of the grasp. Often, beauty is pursued to cover a sense of lack, to distract from the fear of groundlessness, to create an illusion of stability. When these tendencies are seen, they can be met with gentleness, not judged, not suppressed, just known. As the mind grows quieter, its sensitivity increases. Beauty becomes more frequent, not because the world changes, but because perception refines. This is why letting go becomes more urgent. As awareness sharpens, so does the pull of beauty. But wisdom sees through it. Wisdom enjoys the moment, but never gets lost in it. The joy is real, but it is no longer needed. This is the difference between pleasure and attachment. Pleasure is natural. It arises and passes. Attachment resists the passing. It turns a moment into a possession, and in that possession, suffering is born. The fire returns. The burn begins again. Even if the object is subtle, even if the moment is peaceful, if there is clinging, there is tension. The path is not to remove all beauty. It is to meet it with wisdom, to stay steady when joy arises, to remain clear when peace unfolds, to appreciate what is present without building a home inside it. When that becomes possible, freedom deepens. The heart is no longer ruled by preference. The senses are no longer pushed or pulled. The world still offers its forms, but the mind no longer builds illusions around them. This freedom is not cold, It is alive, tender, present. It includes all, and it holds nothing. This is the heart of dispassion, not detachment from life, but openness to life without need, not indifference, but intimacy without grasping. Beauty, when seen clearly, becomes a teacher. It shows us how the mind moves, how it seeks, softens, or tightens. It reveals our relationship to joy, to form, to impermanence. And when the lesson is learned, the experience can be complete. No guilt, no holding, no regret. In this way, even the most subtle joys are woven into the path, not obstacles, but invitations, not destinations, but insights. The path remains grounded, direct, and free from illusion. There is room for everything, but nothing is made into a foundation. This is how the practice matures. The heart opens wider, the mind lets go more easily, the senses remain, but they do not rule. The beauty of the world continues, but its charm no longer binds. Joy is present, peace is present, and the practitioner walks forward, clear, open, unshaken. As the mind becomes free from the grip of beauty and learns to meet even the most alluring experiences without attachment, a deeper quiet starts to reveal itself. Not a silence of absence, but of stillness that is undisturbed by form. No longer pulled by sensation, the practitioner no longer moves with every wave of experience. And from this stillness, the heart begins to understand something even more profound, that views, like pleasures, can be clung to. Ideas, positions, answers, even spiritual concepts can become attachments just as powerful as any desire. And when one sees this, silence takes on a new meaning. In the Buddha's life, there were many moments when silence was his clearest teaching. He did not always answer. Even when asked the deepest questions about the nature of the self, the universe, life after death, there were times when he simply remained quiet. This was not out of confusion or evasion. It was a deliberate act of wisdom, a refusal to be pulled into speculation, into fixed positions, into the endless turning of concepts that do not lead to freedom. This kind of silence was known as noble silence. It was not avoidance, but clarity. The Buddha did not silence himself to protect a belief or to guard a mystery. He stayed silent because he saw that the questions themselves came from a place of grasping, a need to know, to define, to hold reality in a fixed way, and any answer would only feed that grasping. The silence was the answer. These metaphysical questions, often referred to as the unanswerables, were not denied. They were simply set aside as not useful. Whether the world is eternal or not, whether the self exists after death, whether the universe is finite or infinite, these were questions that the Buddha saw as irrelevant to the direct ending of suffering. To chase answers to these was to remain tangled in views, never arriving at peace. This silence points to a radical kind of freedom. Most people build their identities around what they believe, around answers, around knowledge, around the sense that they are right. To not hold a view, to not need to explain, to rest without position, this is a freedom that goes unnoticed by the world. But it is the very heart of liberation. The absence of the need to speak becomes a sign of the absence of clinging. This does not mean the Buddha never taught. He spoke when his words would help, when they would point directly to the ending of suffering. when they would open understanding rather than strengthen ego. But when a question came from the desire to grasp the ungraspable, he did not participate. He stayed quiet, and in that quiet, he revealed the futility of speculation. In today's world, silence is often misunderstood. It is seen as weakness, ignorance, or lack of commitment. But in the context of practice, silence becomes something else entirely. It becomes a mirror. It shows us what we are trying to hold, what we are unwilling to let go of. When we are met with silence, we must turn inward. We must examine the root of the question, the root of the need to know. Clinging to views is one of the most refined attachments. It is often overlooked because it feels noble, intellectual, or even spiritual. But every view, no matter how subtle, becomes a boundary. It divides the world into what is true and false, right and wrong, enlightened and confused. And with that division comes conflict, both inner and outer. The mind becomes rigid, the heart narrows, clinging returns. The Buddha warned against this again and again. He did not ask his followers to accept his words blindly. He encouraged testing, reflection, direct experience. But he also taught that freedom comes not from gaining views, but from letting them go. Even right view, when held too tightly, becomes a trap. It is a raft to be used and then set down. This teaching invites a different relationship with knowledge, one that values clarity over certainty, one that allows space for not knowing, for remaining open, for living without the need to explain everything. This openness is not confusion. It is wisdom without position. It is knowing what matters and what does not. The silence of the Buddha was a teaching about what is essential. He turned the attention away from speculation and toward direct experience, toward suffering and its end, toward the way the mind grasps, not toward the nature of the cosmos, but toward the patterns that keep us bound. In doing so, he redirected the search from the outer to the inner. In practice, this means learning to sit with unanswered questions, to feel the discomfort of uncertainty and not rush to resolve it, to recognize the mind's habit of seeking solid ground and to choose stillness instead. It is not an easy path. The desire to know is strong, but each time we return to silence, we reinforce the capacity to stay present without grasping. Silence also invites humility. The willingness to not have the last word, to not win the argument, to not need to be seen as right. This humility is not low self-worth. It is the absence of self-definition through views. It is the space that allows for real listening, for meeting others without opposition, for connection without ideology. In silence, we learn to trust something deeper than thought. We learn that peace is not the result of having all the answers, but of no longer needing them. That liberation is not found in defining reality, but in letting it be as it is, without defense, without projection, without fixing it into ideas. Even the most profound insights can become views. Even direct experiences of non-self or emptiness can harden into positions. This is why the path continues with letting go, not once, but again and again, until even the insight is released, until even the frame of practice dissolves, until silence remains not as absence, but as completion. This silence is not disengaged. It is alive, responsive, compassionate. It does not avoid life. It simply does not try to control it through ideas. It meets the world without agenda. It responds without needing to hold a position. It acts with clarity, not from doctrine, but from freedom. Letting go of views also means letting go of identity built around knowledge, around being someone who knows, who understands, who has answers. These identities are comforting, but they are also limiting. They keep us in roles. They prevent true openness. When they are released, something else becomes possible. A deeper presence, free from comparison. This presence is not neutral in the sense of being indifferent. It is fully engaged, but not reactive. It can hold complexity without collapsing into duality. It can speak when needed and remain silent when speech would only bind further. It is the wisdom that knows the difference. In meditation, silence becomes the ground. Not just external quiet, but internal spaciousness. The thoughts still arise, but they no longer stick. The commentary fades. The compulsion to explain, to solve, to know begins to dissolve. What remains is awareness, clear and open. And in daily life, silence becomes a practice of restraint, not suppressing speech, but choosing it carefully. Not filling every gap with opinion, but letting stillness speak. This restraint is not repression. It is discipline rooted in understanding. It protects the mind. It cultivates clarity. This understanding also changes how we receive teachings. We no longer grasp at every word. We listen with curiosity, not desperation. We test what is useful and release what is not. We do not build towers of belief. We walk the path with open hands. Even the view that there is no self, if clung to, becomes self. It becomes a position, a banner, another identity. The Buddha pointed beyond all of it, not to another view, but to the freedom of no position. The end of all inner argument. The mind not needing to take sides. This is why silence is called noble, because it refuses to play the game of views. It does not seek to win. It does not need to be heard. It is not based in fear, but in understanding. It knows that peace comes not from being right, but from being free. And when this silence is lived, not just practiced, something shifts. The mind becomes less reactive. The heart becomes less defensive. Relationships become less tense. The world becomes easier to move through. Not because it changes, but because we are no longer adding fire to it. Silence, then, is not the absence of thought. It is the absence of clinging to thought. It is the end of fighting with what is, the end of needing the last word, the end of making reality conform to our ideas. It is surrender, not in weakness, but in strength. In that surrender, life unfolds naturally. Words arise when needed. Actions follow clarity. Questions come and go. But the center remains quiet, not confused, not detached, just still, just open. This is the silence of the Buddha, a silence rooted in deep understanding, a silence that holds no view because it holds nothing, and in holding nothing, it holds everything. From this place, the path continues, not toward more knowledge, but toward deeper peace, not through adding, but through releasing, until the last view is seen, and even that is let go, and in its place, silence, full, whole, free. When silence becomes the most honest response and all views are laid down, even the wish to be understood dissolves. What remains is a clarity that does not lean on thought. It no longer defends a position, does not reach for resolution, and has no need to impress. But even within this space, a very subtle intention can still take root. A vow that appears selfless, noble, even sacred, yet carries with it the lingering scent of control. This is where the illusion becomes hardest to detect, when the desire to help others begins to conceal the self's last effort to survive through purpose, identity, or imagined outcome. The Bodhisattva ideal, which arises in Mahayana traditions, speaks of infinite compassion. It is the deep commitment to postpone final liberation in order to help all sentient beings awaken. On the surface, this is a vow of complete selflessness, but when examined carefully, even this aspiration can become a shelter for attachment, not in its form, but in the hidden ways the mind begins to identify with it. The sense of being someone who helps, someone who serves, someone who sacrifices, this too can quietly build a self. The illusion of control begins when the vow is grasped rather than lived, when it becomes a project, a mission, or a long path with expectations. The mind starts to track progress. It evaluates impact. It measures success by the awakening of others. And when others resist, when suffering does not end, frustration arises. This frustration is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of grasping, of wanting reality to align with a story, of needing results to feel whole. The Bodhisattva vow is pure when it comes from emptiness, when there is no self carrying it, no identity formed around it, no need to fulfill it. Compassion becomes action, not project. Care flows naturally, not strategically. Help is offered without waiting for recognition or response. There is no attachment to being the one who gives, nor sadness if the giving goes unnoticed. The vow remains a current, not a structure, a direction, not a role. But when control sneaks in, even through love, the vow becomes heavy. It turns into burden. The mind begins to carry the world instead of being with it. Suffering becomes something to fix rather than to meet with presence. The heart tenses. The schedule fills. Life feels rushed, urgent, always on the edge of not doing enough. And underneath it, the sense of self grows stronger, defined now by effort, by dedication, by sacrifice. This is not an argument against compassion. It is a call to examine the roots of action, to see whether the care offered comes from clarity or from fear, whether the wish to serve is open or clinging, whether the identity of helper has replaced other identities that were already dropped. The ego that once wore status may now wear kindness, but it still wants to be someone, still wants to matter, still wants to be needed. Control also appears in the desire to shape others' paths. Even when intentions are gentle, the mind may want others to awaken quickly, to follow certain teachings, to make different choices. When they don't, the reaction may be subtle irritation or sadness. These are signs that compassion has become conditional, that the vow has turned into expectation. The freedom of others has become secondary to the image of helping. True compassion does not need to orchestrate results. It is content to offer and let go, to serve and step back. It trusts the unfolding of others without trying to push or shape. It honors each being's timing, each person's path. It does not attach to methods or outcomes. It holds no judgment for how long awakening takes. It meets everyone where they are, not to pull them forward, but to walk beside them for a while, without agenda. Even the idea of saving all beings must be held lightly. When taken literally, it creates an impossible task. The number of beings is without limit. Their conditions are endlessly diverse. The world is always changing. The vow, when misunderstood, can become overwhelming. The practitioner may fall into despair, feeling they can never do enough. This despair is not caused by reality, but by the insistence on outcome, the expectation that the vow must be fulfilled in a particular way. But the essence of the vow is not completion, it is direction. It is an orientation of the heart, not a target. It expresses the natural movement of a heart no longer centered on itself. It is not a strategy, but a reflection of emptiness. When there is no self to protect, compassion arises. When there is no agenda, service becomes effortless. It responds without needing to accomplish. This understanding also frees the practitioner from comparison. When the vow is held as identity, it becomes another way to measure self-worth. How devoted one is, how much one has done, how others view one's sincerity. These measurements distort the path. They create pressure, they build anxiety. When the vow is returned to emptiness, these concerns fall away. There is no one to succeed, no one to fail. Just the present moment, calling for presence. This freedom from identity also dissolves guilt. Many practitioners feel they should be doing more, helping more, serving more. They carry quiet shame when they rest. But this shame is based on an imagined self, the self who must always be useful, always be good, always be strong. When the vow is not held as a demand, but as a reflection of clarity, the heart is free to rest, free to step back when needed, free to care without collapsing. The illusion of control also appears in spiritual ambition. The desire to be an example, to live as an ideal, to fulfill the vow perfectly. This desire creates tension. It turns the path into performance. But the path is not about image. It is about honesty. If the vow is lived from ego, it adds to suffering. If it is lived from freedom, it brings lightness. The difference is not in the action, but in the clinging. Letting go of control means allowing compassion to be incomplete, allowing care to arise when it does, and to rest when it does not. It means being honest about limitations, about the body's needs, the mind's fatigue, the natural rhythm of energy. It means not forcing kindness as duty, not faking peace to appear mature. It means trusting that presence itself is enough. This does not mean turning away from suffering. It means meeting suffering without ownership, without needing to be the one who solves, the one who understands, the one who leads. It means being fully present and empty-handed, listening deeply, acting when moved, and letting go completely. Even the desire for others' awakening must be met with care. While it may seem noble, it can carry subtle force. A hidden wish to change people, to fix their path, to hurry their realization. But awakening cannot be given, it cannot be forced. It must arise from within. The most compassionate support is presence without demand, reflection without interference, trust without pressure. The bodhisattva path, when misunderstood, becomes a role, a mask worn in spiritual circles, a source of pride or responsibility. But when seen clearly, It is simply the natural movement of the heart when the self is quiet. Not a vow made once, but a choice made moment to moment. Not a burden, but a flow. Not a mission, but a truth. Letting go of control also means accepting that the world may not change quickly, that suffering will continue, that beings may resist growth, that conditions may remain harsh, but none of this negates the vow, because the vow is not about changing the world, it is about meeting the world as it is, with full attention, open heart, and no clinging. In this view, the vow is not heavy. It is light because it expects nothing. It acts without seeking. It loves without holding. It serves without becoming someone. This is the real meaning of non-attachment in compassion: to give completely and to release completely, to love deeply and to let go fully. Even when the vow is forgotten, it is not lost. When the heart returns to silence, the direction returns naturally. There is no need to uphold it with effort. It lives beneath striving. It moves in freedom. It appears as care, as stillness, as truth. This is the subtlety of the path. Even the most beautiful intentions can be hiding places for clinging. The practitioner must be honest, not only with actions, but with the source of those actions. Not only with effort, but with the identity behind effort. The more clearly this is seen, the more natural the vow becomes. It is no longer something to remember. It becomes the way things move when there is no self in the way. And so the vow continues, not as pressure, not as project, but as expression, not because of belief, but because of truth, not seeking results, not defending an ideal, not wearing a role, just present, just open, just free. When compassionate vows are no longer held as roles, when helping does not need recognition or result, the heart begins to rest in a deeper kind of trust. Not trust in outcome, not even trust in self, but trust in the natural unfolding of what is. The world no longer has to be saved, only met. Presence becomes effortless, not because everything is known, but because the urge to control has finally dissolved. Yet even here, the mind may not be fully free. It may still return to a more hidden habit, one so close, so constant, that it is rarely questioned. The habit of living inside time. Time is not just a clock or a calendar. In the deepest teachings of the Buddha, time is revealed as a mental construct, a framework the mind uses to orient itself. Past, present, and future feel real, but they are stitched together by perception. And when clung to, they create suffering. Each one becomes a place to hold on. The past becomes a museum of identity, the future a mirror of hope or fear, and even the present becomes a stage we try to manage or freeze. Letting go of time is not about denying the movements of day and night or the aging of the body. It is about seeing clearly that what we call time is held in thought. The moment we say, "This happened," we are constructing memory. When we say, "This will happen," we are imagining possibility. When we say, "This is happening now," we are still labeling experience through a mental lens. Without that lens, there is just happening, just unfolding, just awareness. The clinging to the past is one of the most common ways we bind ourselves. We collect stories about what was done, what was lost, what should have been different. We revisit conversations, rehearse regrets, analyze choices. The past becomes a structure the self lives inside. Even pleasant memories can become a trap, creating longing for what cannot return. But the past, however vivid, is gone. What remains is only the echo in thought. And yet the mind insists on returning, as if by replaying it enough times, something will change. True letting go of the past does not mean forgetting. It means seeing memory as movement, not reality. Seeing it arise and fall like any other thought. It means meeting what comes up without becoming it. Pain may revisit, joy may revisit, but neither is permanent, neither is you. When the past is not clung to, its hold dissolves, identity loosens, history becomes background, not a home. Clinging to the future is no less painful. It begins with planning and ends in anxiety. We imagine what may happen and then try to prepare, control, or avoid it. The mind projects forward, seeking safety, certainty, or reward. But the future never arrives as imagined. It always appears as this moment. And yet we trade the presence of now for the illusion of later. This is the root of restlessness, of fear, of endless striving. Always waiting for something more. Letting go of the future does not mean carelessness. It means no longer needing to lean on imagined outcomes. It means moving with awareness rather than anticipation, trusting that the next step will appear as needed, that the unfolding of life cannot be controlled, only met. When the future is no longer needed for identity or hope, peace begins to grow. Even the present can become a place of clinging. When the mind turns awareness into a possession, I am here, now, being mindful, it builds another identity. It tries to grasp the present as if it were an object. It turns the moment into something to hold, to preserve. But the present is not a thing. It cannot be owned. It is not even a single point. It is a continuous unfolding that cannot be frozen. Trying to stay in the present as a goal is also a form of craving, a spiritual performance. Real presence is not created by effort. It is what remains when time is not being constructed. When thought quiets and the mind stops dividing experience into before and after. Then what's left is awareness without reference, no timeline, no measuring. The Buddha described a mind that does not abide in the 3 times. It does not rest in memory. It does not lean into future. It does not get stuck in the idea of now. This is the mind that is free, because it is not bound by thoughts' labels. It does not seek continuity. It does not fear change. It simply meets what is, as it is, without placing it into a timeline. This understanding changes how we hold our stories. Our life narrative loses its weight. We no longer need to define who we are by what has happened. The arc of our existence, once so tightly held, becomes a string of passing impressions, not false, but not fixed, not erased, but no longer binding. We become less interested in explaining ourselves, less attached to being understood through history. It also changes our relationship to goals. Without the future as a resting place, we no longer depend on becoming. Motivation does not vanish, but it becomes lighter. We still act, we still plan when needed, but without illusion, without needing the future to complete us. We let go of timelines for awakening, for peace, for freedom. The path becomes more fluid, more honest. Time clinging also fuels comparison. When we look at others and feel behind, it's because we're living in imagined progress. We believe we should be further along. that there is a timeline we've failed to match. This causes quiet shame, jealousy, or urgency. But when time loses its hold, comparison softens. There is no race, no clock, no competition, only this life as it is, unfolding uniquely. Letting go of time also softens aging. The body will continue its changes, but the fear of getting older is rooted in identity built through time. When that identity fades, aging becomes less threatening. Each stage of life is just another form, another arising and passing. The pressure to achieve, to prove, to accumulate fades. Presence becomes enough. Even death changes meaning when time is not held. Death becomes a continuation of impermanence, not an ending of self. If there is no abiding in the past or future, death is not the loss of anything. It is the natural movement of conditions. It is not feared, not denied, not dramatized, just another unfolding, another letting go. This freedom is not philosophical, it is practical. Each moment lived without clinging to time opens a space without hurry, without regret, without fear. From this space, action becomes cleaner, words become simpler, decisions become less tangled, life becomes more direct, practice itself shifts. We no longer meditate to reach some future state, we no longer chase progress. Each breath is enough. Each moment of awareness is complete. The depth of the path is measured not by time spent, but by the absence of time altogether. Even insight is not dated. It arrives without clock or calendar. Relationships also benefit. We stop holding others to stories. We stop defining them by their past or needing them to promise the future. We meet people as they are now, without agenda. Forgiveness becomes easier. Expectations fade. Presence becomes the gift, not performance. Letting go of time does not mean becoming passive. It means becoming real. Fully responsive to now, but not fixated on now. Acting when needed, resting when needed, without the burden of narrative. It means living outside the storyline, in the field where things arise and pass without needing to be named. This freedom grows slowly. The mind will return to time again and again. That is natural. But each time it is seen, each time the pull of past or future is noticed and not followed, the habit weakens, the sense of spaciousness deepens, the trust in presence strengthens. Eventually, there is less desire to explain anything. Life becomes mystery, not problem. There is nothing to solve, only to meet. The question of what happens next no longer matters. The need to remember everything softens. The urge to hold on to moments fades. Peace becomes the absence of timeline, the absence of story, the absence of need to place experience into boxes of before, during, and after. What remains is openness, not confused, not dull, just unbound. And from this place, the path continues, not forward, not backward, just this step, fully met, without destination, just awareness, here, untouched by the 3 times. This is freedom, not escape from time, but the end of holding it, not denial of the past or future, but no longer seeking refuge in them, just presence. Alive, unmeasured, whole. When time no longer defines experience and the grip of past, present, and future loosens, the mind begins to settle into something more intimate than duration. What remains is the clarity of impermanence, not as a thought or idea, but as direct knowing. Everything arises and ends. Every moment dissolves as soon as it appears. There is nothing solid to hold, and nowhere for the self to land. This awareness can bring peace, but it can also uncover resistance. At the root of that resistance lies one of the most deeply held fears, the reality of death. Most people avoid thinking about death. It feels like a threat, something to be delayed, feared, denied, or pushed into abstraction. But in the Buddha's path, death is not avoided. It is brought into the light of awareness and faced directly, not as something to dread, but as a tool for awakening. The practice of death meditation, or Maranasati, is not a morbid fixation. It is a gateway to non-attachment. When approached with wisdom, it brings freedom. The reflection on death cuts through illusion with sharp clarity. It reveals that everything we depend on, our body, our relationships, our possessions, our memories, is temporary. Nothing is guaranteed. The breath we are taking now may be our last. This truth, when truly seen, can stop the mind's endless grasping. It pulls attention into what matters, into what is real, not because it forces urgency, but because it brings honesty. Maranasati is not about imagining gruesome images or fearing the unknown. It is a contemplative recognition of what has always been true, that this life is fleeting, that we are not in control of how or when it ends, that nothing we cling to will last. The point of this practice is not despair. It is to see clearly enough that the heart naturally begins to let go. Letting go in this context is not rejection. It is release. It is loosening the fist that has tried to hold the unholdable. When we realize that everything we cherish will pass, we can begin to appreciate it without owning it. We stop trying to make things permanent. We begin to relate to the world with tenderness rather than possession. Gratitude, not fear, can emerge. One of the first insights that arises through death contemplation is the impermanence of the body. We see it aging, changing, losing strength. We may feel subtle discomfort or even grief as we reflect on the loss of health or beauty. But the deeper truth is that this body was never ours. It is part of nature. It came from causes and conditions, and it will return to them. We live in it, but we do not own it. When this is understood, fear begins to soften. Even physical pain becomes less personal. Death contemplation also reveals the fragility of control. We plan, schedule, and expect continuity, but we do not know what will come. We assume tomorrow will arrive, but there is no certainty. This isn't meant to create anxiety. It is meant to dissolve false security, to show that control is limited, that the future is unknown. And when the fantasy of control fades, something else becomes available. Trust. Not in a specific outcome, but in the flow of life and death itself. This practice also shifts how we relate to possessions. When we reflect on death, the urgency to accumulate fades. The pressure to achieve status, wealth, or admiration begins to look hollow. These things cannot follow us. They provide no protection. Knowing this doesn't make them meaningless, but it restores perspective. Usefulness, not ownership, becomes the focus. Generosity grows. Clinging shrinks. Relationships too are transformed. When we contemplate the death of loved ones, not as a possibility, but as a certainty, we meet them differently. Small resentments lose their power. Unspoken appreciation is more easily expressed. We stop taking connection for granted. Death contemplation doesn't make love smaller. It deepens it. Because we no longer assume we have time. We meet others with less demand, more presence. Maranasati also challenges the attachment to self-image. When we see that the body will die, that memory will fade, that names will be forgotten, we begin to question what this self really is. What remains when identity is stripped away? Who are we really, if not our roles, histories, and reputations? This inquiry is not philosophical. It is a doorway to freedom. Because when the self is no longer propped up by illusions of permanence, there is nothing left to protect. Fear of death often comes from not having lived fully, from postponing joy, from holding back expression, from waiting for the right moment. But death reflection interrupts that waiting. It says the moment is now, that life is not a rehearsal, that the heart can open without delay. It is a call to meet life directly, not through goals, but through presence. This kind of reflection is not passive. It is alive. It energizes the path. It brings urgency without panic, purpose without pressure. The Buddha encouraged frequent remembrance of death, not to depress, but to awaken. Those who keep death in mind are said to live with diligence, clarity, and care. They waste less time, they gossip less, they worry less about what does not matter. The practice can be formal or informal. It may be as simple as pausing each morning and remembering, this day is not guaranteed. It may involve reflecting on the inevitability of death while walking, eating, or resting. It can also take the form of deeper contemplation. What if this breath were my last? What remains undone? What would I release right now if I accepted that nothing continues? Such questions are not meant to create guilt, but honesty. They expose what we hold most tightly. They reveal where we are still resisting impermanence. And they invite gentle letting go, not by force, but by wisdom. The more often we reflect, the more natural that letting go becomes. The beauty of this practice is that it cuts across all other attachments. It simplifies the path. It removes the need to argue, to be right, to be recognized. It makes room for forgiveness, for humility, for connection. The boundaries that usually divide us begin to soften, because death makes us equal, and in that equality, compassion deepens. Contemplating death also brings us closer to the truth of emptiness, not in a cold or abstract way, but through intimacy with change. We see that nothing holds, that even this moment is dying as it lives, that all forms dissolve, and if all things are in motion, then none can be possessed, none can be made into a permanent self. This insight becomes less intellectual, more embodied, less theory, more lived. Even fear of death can be met with tenderness. When we stop running from it, it loses its edge. We see it not as an enemy, but as part of the same nature that gives birth, part of the cycle that holds us all. When death is not pushed away, life opens, not because anything changes, but because the clinging weakens. Some may fear that reflecting on death removes joy, but the opposite is true. It removes distraction. It clarifies values. It turns attention toward what nourishes, what heals, what matters. The mind becomes less busy. The heart becomes more honest. The practice becomes less about achievement and more about presence. This reflection also supports equanimity. When we know that everything will end, gain and loss become easier to hold. Success is seen as temporary, so is failure. Praise passes, so does blame. The mind begins to rest, not in indifference, but in understanding, in the balance that comes from knowing what cannot be held. The illusion of permanence begins to fade, not as loss, but as release. We stop trying to freeze experience. We allow it to live and die in its time. This applies not only to people and things, but to moods, thoughts, and sensations. They arise and fall. Trying to preserve them only creates tension. Letting them pass brings ease. Eventually, even the fear of non-existence begins to soften, because we see that non-existence is already part of life. Every night, the world disappears in sleep. Every breath ends. Every thought fades, and yet awareness continues. The self that feared death begins to look less solid. The clinging to continuity becomes less compelling. Marana Sati leads us not into darkness, but into lightness, into a mind that holds nothing tightly, into a heart that does not postpone, into a path that wastes no step. And while death is not romanticized, it is no longer avoided. It is met, like everything else, with clear eyes and an open hand. When death is accepted, not just as concept, but as truth, life becomes vivid, not because we add anything, but because nothing is filtered. The ordinary becomes enough. The moment becomes whole. The practice becomes steady. And so we continue, not to escape death, but to befriend it. Not to fight time, but to meet what is here. The path narrows, but it becomes clear. The heart softens, but it becomes strong. And the clinging fades, not by rejection, but by wisdom. The breath comes, the breath goes, each one a teacher, each one a letting go. And within that letting go, the peace we have always sought begins to rise, quietly, naturally, without needing to last. Just this, just now, fully met, then gone. When the mind makes peace with death and the heart stops postponing presence, something very subtle arises, an ease that doesn't grasp, a clarity untouched by fear. But within that ease, there remains one final habit the mind may still try to keep. It's quiet, it's refined, and it wears the appearance of humility. It is the subtle pride of having let go, the identity of the one who has surrendered, the self-image of the spiritually advanced. This is the last mask of clinging, the attachment to being someone who has transcended attachment. This form of attachment is difficult to recognize because it does not arise from greed or aversion. It grows in the shadow of the path itself. After years of effort, discipline, silence, and reflection, the mind may begin to weave a new identity, one that is not built on success or story, but on detachment. And even though the content has changed, the structure of self remains. The idea of I has not disappeared. It has simply moved to a more subtle place. The thought might sound like, I've come far. I don't cling like I used to. I've learned to let go. These thoughts appear harmless, but they place self at the center. They reinforce the idea of someone who owns insight, someone who has achieved something through practice, and with this identity comes comparison, a quiet sense of difference from others. Even if it's not spoken, it is felt. I'm beyond what they are still learning. This is the trap of spiritual achievement, not in the experience of clarity, but in the identification with it. The mind turns practice into possession. It uses insight to build status. It turns realization into a personal trait. And even while saying there is no self, it quietly continues the story of self-improvement. The danger here is not in experiencing progress. It's in claiming it, in measuring it, in needing to be seen a certain way. This turns spiritual growth into currency, into a subtle performance. Even when humility is expressed, it can carry hidden pride. I'm no one may really mean, see how free I am. This is not freedom. It is another mask. Letting go is not a badge. It is not an achievement. It is an ongoing process of releasing every layer of identity, even the one that appears after awakening. The mind will try to build permanence anywhere it can. If it cannot have control, it will try to be the one who has given it up. If it cannot hold on to form, it will try to own formlessness. This is the last movement of clinging. Practice must turn toward this tendency, not with judgment, but with honesty. When the thought arises, I have let go, pause. Who is the I? What is being claimed? What is being compared? When there is truly no clinging, there is no one to declare it, no need to highlight it, no self to maintain or explain. This trap also shows itself in the desire to be a guide, to help others from the place of having arrived. While sharing wisdom can be generous, it becomes distorted when it is used to reinforce identity. I help because I've seen more. I teach because I've gone further. These intentions are not wrong, but they must be watched, because they can become self-serving, even while dressed in service. The Buddha warned about this repeatedly. He taught that even attachment to wisdom is still attachment. Even attachment to virtue is still bondage. The path is not finished when there is clarity. It is finished when there is no clinging to clarity, no claiming, no building of self-image around understanding. The mind is skilled at preservation. It wants to stay intact, even in the midst of release. It does not mind letting go of the world, as long as it can remain as the one who let go. This is where true renunciation becomes difficult, because it demands that even the self who walked the path be left behind, that even the narrative of progress be dropped. The heart of freedom is not in what is gained, but in what is no longer needed, not in what is seen, but in what is no longer claimed. The most profound moments of insight are often accompanied by silence, not because there is nothing to say, but because there is no one left to speak, no one left to decorate. Just this, just now, without story. This detachment from achievement also dissolves the timeline of awakening. There is no longer a before and after, no longer a sense of distance from the one who began. There is just awareness, unfolding, just conditions arising, just life living itself, without a watcher, without a doer, without a climber of any ladder. Even the memory of awakening can become a chain. The thought, that was the moment, becomes a reference point, a mental object, something to protect, to return to. But clinging to realization is not different from clinging to any experience. It turns the open field into a monument, and monuments are heavy. To go deeper, even the desire to deepen must be released, not by force, but by seeing its nature. The one who wants to deepen is still measuring, still striving, still caught in becoming. When the wish for advancement is met with understanding, it dissolves. What remains is natural unfolding. No force, no hurry. This level of release does not mean that practice stops, but it shifts in flavor. It is no longer effort toward an image. It becomes gentle attention, a kind of listening that does not seek anything, a presence that moves freely without intention to attain. The paradox is that the most mature stages of practice often look like nothing special. There is no performance, no spiritual language, no need to prove depth. There may be deep insight, but it's held lightly. There may be clarity, but it's not broadcasted. There may be love, but it doesn't carry obligation. To let go of letting go means there is no longer a self-keeping score, no need to check if progress has happened, no need to describe how far one has come. That accounting system has collapsed. The value of the path is no longer found in milestones, but in the absence of craving. This shift also removes the need to fix others. Without the identity of the awakened one, the practitioner no longer places themselves above or ahead. Compassion continues, but it becomes cleaner, not mixed with authority, not colored by image. It flows because the heart is open, not because the mind wants to be right. Letting go of spiritual achievement also allows room for mystery. The urge to define the path, to wrap it up in explanations, begins to dissolve. What remains is a kind of humility that does not seek confirmation, that does not need to be validated, that is at peace with not knowing. This humility is not weakness. It is strength rooted in silence. It is the freedom to speak or not speak, to lead or to step aside, to be present without being seen. It is the end of being someone, not because the self has been erased, but because it is no longer believed. The ego wants ownership of awakening. It wants a story to tell. It wants to feel different, special, ahead. But the truth is simple. There is no one who awakens. Awakening is not something that happens to a person. It is the absence of the illusion of personhood. When that illusion is no longer fed, the story ends. And with the end of the story comes a different kind of life, one that is not measured in terms of progress or attainment, one that doesn't depend on the perception of others, one that does not aim to impress. It is a quiet life, lived without center, without goal, without self-image. Even the word awakening becomes lighter. It no longer holds a charge, no longer carries weight. It is not a prize, not a final moment. It is simply the falling away of illusion, again and again. A process that cannot be possessed, a reality that cannot be claimed. The deepest letting go is letting go of being someone who lets go. The final illusion is the one who believes they are beyond illusion. When that too fades, only presence remains, open, simple, whole. And in that presence, there is nothing left to maintain, nothing to polish, nothing to become. Just this breath, just this step, without owner, without measure, without pride. This is the freedom the path has always pointed to, not the pride of detachment, but the end of pride itself. Not the identity of awakening, but the absence of identity. Not the possession of clarity, but the letting go of all claims. And from this absence, life flows naturally, without the watcher, without the achiever, without the narrator. Just stillness in movement, just awareness in expression, just love without story. Nothing to attain, nothing to prove, nothing to hold, nothing to be. Only freedom, only now, only release, when even the identity of one who has let go is released. When there is no longer any inner reference point to measure, to compare, or to narrate a path, what remains is neither absence nor dullness. It is clarity without ownership. The sense of progress dissolves, and so too does the one who claimed awakening. But even here, there may be one more quiet construct the mind rests upon: the observer, the witness, the one who is simply aware of everything else. It does not judge, it does not act, it only sees. And yet this last posture of subtle self, revered in many traditions, must also be examined closely. Because even the witness, if held as something real or separate, becomes a final veil. And to pass through that veil, the view of emptiness must go further. In the Madhyamaka school of Buddhist philosophy, the middle way is not a position between extremes, but a method of seeing through the extremes entirely. It is not a compromise between existence and non-existence. It is the realization that neither holds absolute truth. Everything that arises does so dependently, not from itself, not from something else, not from both, and not without cause. This principle, called dependent origination, reveals that nothing has independent essence. All phenomena, including what we call the observer, are empty of self-nature. The observer seems safe. It doesn't engage in craving. It doesn't chase experiences. It watches from a distance. But this distance is not proof of transcendence. It can be the last defense of the subtle self. It is the belief that there is something stable behind experience, something watching that remains untouched. This becomes another hiding place, a refuge not in freedom, but in duality. There is experience, and there is the one who knows it. That division is the final illusion. When the witness is investigated, it cannot be found. It is not in the eyes, though it sees. It is not in thoughts, though it knows them. It is not in space, though it perceives movement. It does not appear as form, and it has no name or boundary. Yet we speak of it as if it were a fixed point. This habit is based on subtle reification, turning a useful convention into a supposed essence. But when we ask, where is the observer located? How does it exist? Can it be separated from the moment it observes? These questions start to dismantle the illusion. In direct experience, the observer and the observed arise together. One does not stand apart from the other. Seeing and what is seen are not two. There is only experience unfolding. When we divide it, we create duality. And in that duality, the self returns, not as the doer, not as the thinker, but as the one who is quietly present behind it all. But this presence is not an entity. It is a function. It arises dependently, and what arises in dependence is empty. The Madhyamaka approach dismantles all views, including the view of a background awareness. It uses reasoning not to reach conclusions, but to remove assumptions. If the observer exists independently, it must be unchanging, but what is unchanging cannot function. If it changes, then it arises and ceases like anything else. If it is the same in all states, it cannot distinguish one moment from another. If it differs across states, then it is conditioned. These reflections expose the contradictions in holding the witness as real. Some traditions speak of pure consciousness or primordial awareness. These can be helpful pointers, but they too must be released. If they are turned into absolutes, they become subtle forms of self. They reintroduce a foundation. But the middle way does not allow for any fixed ground. Not in things, not in mind, not even in consciousness. The ultimate teaching is not that there is something behind all this, but that there is no inherent existence anywhere. And from this insight, true freedom appears. Emptiness is not negation. It is openness. It does not mean that nothing exists, but that nothing exists independently. Everything is interdependent, impermanent, without a self-essence. This includes the idea of an internal witness. There is cognition, there is knowing, but there is no solid knower behind it. When this is seen, the mind no longer needs to maintain a center. The world is not split into subject and object. There is just this, the total unfolding of conditions, without anyone inside them. When the observer is dropped, awareness remains, but it is not owned, it is not held, it is not directed from a distance. It is simply what is, ungrasped, centerless, free. And this freedom is not found by clinging to awareness, but by seeing that even awareness is empty, not absent, not meaningless, just not separate from what it knows. No seer, no seen, just seeing, dependent on conditions. This level of understanding transforms meditation. No longer is there someone watching the breath. No longer a mind observing thoughts. There is breathing, known. There is thought, known. But the one who watches is no longer believed. Practice becomes less structured, less aimed, more natural. The tension of control fades. The illusion of being the background presence dissolves. What remains is clarity without identity. This also transforms how we hold the path. There is no longer a person walking it. There are just steps unfolding. The teachings are not things we use. They are conditions arising within experience. Insight is not something possessed. It arises and passes. Even awakening is not held. It is not a state to reach, but the falling away of false views. Language often makes this difficult to see. We say, I am aware, I observe, I know. And these phrases reinforce the sense of a subject behind them. But when we look closely, that subject is never found. It is assumed but not seen. It is spoken of but never directly touched. It is a mental knot that unravels when questioned. The middle way invites this questioning, not as intellectual exercise, but as liberation. It dismantles the stories that keep us bound. It does not provide new answers. It removes the need for answers. It reveals the fluid nature of all experience, that nothing stands alone, that nothing is fixed. Even mindfulness becomes less of a task. It is no longer something a person does. It is the natural knowing of what arises without interference. There is less effort to maintain attention because there is no self doing it. There is only the unfolding of awareness as part of conditions. This understanding also removes spiritual hierarchy. There is no awakened self above others, no enlightened witness at the top. These are only ideas. They dissolve under scrutiny. What remains is the same emptiness in all beings, the same nature of not-self in every moment. No one higher, no one lower, just emptiness, equally shared. This perspective brings humility, not through shame, but through the loss of comparison. There is no self to elevate or diminish, just this moment, appearing and vanishing, just this experience, without center. The mind softens, the heart opens, the need to be someone fades, even compassion changes. It is no longer the act of a person helping another. It is the natural movement of emptiness expressing itself. It is not owned, not assigned. It happens where it needs to, without pride, without identity. The same is true for wisdom. It is not something a person acquires. It is what arises when delusion falls away. It is not located, not claimed. It does not belong to a witness. It belongs to no one. It is simply the absence of confusion. Letting go of the observer self also removes fear. Fear is always rooted in the self, its survival, its continuity, its image. Without a center, fear loses fuel. There may still be danger, but there is no one threatened, just causes and conditions unfolding. This does not lead to numbness, it leads to intimacy. When the mind stops standing back, it enters fully. Without watcher, everything is met more directly. Emotions are not analyzed, they are felt. Sound is not filtered, it is heard. Experience is not controlled, it is lived. This is what the middle way reveals, not a theory, but a reality that cannot be captured, a view that sees through all views, a wisdom that is not knowledge, but the ending of false knowing. The observer was never real. It was always a lens, a habit, a placeholder. When it dissolves, nothing is lost. What remains is wholeness without self. And in that wholeness, the path continues. Not walked by anyone, not leading anywhere, just this. Each moment arising in emptiness, passing without residue, seen without division. No observer, no subject, no owner. Only freedom, quiet, centerless, full. When the illusion of a fixed observer falls away and awareness is no longer tied to a witness, a new layer of seeing begins. What once felt like a center is now revealed as a process, fluid, interconnected, not separate from what arises. No knower behind knowing, no thinker behind thought, no one watching the flow, just causes and conditions, unfolding moment by moment. And if nothing stands on its own, then the question naturally follows. How does clinging even start? How does suffering, born of attachment, take shape if there's no one inside to grasp? The Buddha offered a clear map, 12 steps known as dependent origination or paticca samuppada. Not a theory, but a structure of experience showing how suffering arises. Not linear, not rigid, but deeply revealing when traced with care. Most people learn the 12 links from beginning to end. from ignorance to aging and death, from not seeing clearly all the way to the pain of impermanence. But what happens when we turn around? What happens when we walk the path backward, not in time, but in attention, starting from the suffering we know so well and tracing it back to its root? This reversal doesn't undo the teaching, it clarifies it. It exposes the exact point where attachment begins, where it builds, and where it can be interrupted. To understand this, start with the end of the chain, aging and death. This is not only physical death, but every kind of ending. The death of a moment, of a relationship, of a role, of an image. Aging here includes decay, decline, disintegration. These bring pain, not simply because they occur, but because the mind resists them, because we expect permanence in a world that constantly changes, and that resistance leads to sorrow, lamentation, and despair. These emotions are not random. They are not signs of weakness. They arise because something we've held on to is slipping away. Before this grief, there is becoming, bhava, the process of constructing a self, a way of being, a personal reality. This is where identity forms, where we play roles, where mental formation begins to solidify. Becoming is not static, it's active. It's the mind reinforcing a version of self through action, through thought, through habit. It sets the conditions for birth, not just literal birth, but the emergence of another constructed self. That birth, jati, is the moment a new identity forms. It might be the birth of me as successful, me as wounded, me as spiritual. These identities are not random. They arise out of past conditioning and present intention. Once they are born, they inevitably age. They encounter failure, disappointment, change, and so the cycle continues. But what drives becoming? What prepares the ground for identity to take root? Clinging, upadana, the grasping at ideas, feelings, views, rituals, and selves. Clinging is not just physical desire, it's psychological dependency. It's the pressure to make something mine, to make it last, to make it define me. We cling to opinions, memories, outcomes, and the moment we do, suffering begins. Clinging doesn't arise from nowhere. It is the child of craving, tanha, the thirst for pleasure, for being, for non-being. Craving is the push and pull of the mind, wanting this, avoiding that. It is born of discomfort and the fantasy that satisfaction lies elsewhere. Craving is not always loud. It can be subtle, a slight leaning forward, a quiet resistance. But even that is enough to begin the cycle again. And craving arises because of feeling, vedana, the moment-to-moment tone of experience, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Every sensation is stamped with this tone. It's not added later, it's immediate. The mind notices something and immediately reacts. If it's pleasant, we want it. If it's painful, we push it away. If it's neutral, we often ignore it. These reactions are fast, often unnoticed, but they shape everything. Feeling arises through contact, phassa, the meeting of sense-object, sense-organ, and consciousness. When these three come together, experience is born. The eye sees a form, the mind knows it, and the feeling arises. But the feeling doesn't come from the object alone. It comes from the contact. It is not in the world, it is in the relationship between attention and object. This contact is possible because of the 6 sense bases, salayatana, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. These are not just physical organs, they are systems of perception. Without them, there is no interaction. With them, the world appears, not as it is, but as filtered through these bases. And these bases are not chosen. They arise because of name and form, nama rupa. Name and form refers to mentality and materiality, mind and body. Together, they create the conditions for perception. Mental factors include intention, attention, contact, and sensation. Form includes the body, shaped by past actions. Name and form is the dual structure that gives rise to the appearance of a world, and it cannot exist without consciousness, vijnana. Consciousness here means awareness tied to a particular sense, eye consciousness, ear consciousness, mind consciousness. It is the knowing of experience, but it is not self-sustaining. It depends on name and form to arise. This mutual dependency shows that neither is primary. They co-arise, supporting each other like 2 sheaves of reeds. But how does this consciousness appear in the first place? Through formations, sankhara. These are volitional patterns, karmic tendencies, mental habits. Formations are not random. They are shaped by intention. They condition consciousness, coloring it with momentum from the past. They are the echoes of previous clinging, the residue of previous choices. Formations arise from ignorance, avidya, not a lack of information, but a fundamental misperception. Ignorance is not seeing clearly the nature of reality, not knowing impermanence, not self and suffering. It is the root illusion that gives rise to the whole chain. Ignorance does not mean stupidity. It is the normal way the untrained mind functions, dividing the world, clinging to what is impermanent, searching for what does not exist. Tracing the links in reverse, the path becomes clearer. Suffering arises from birth. Birth arises from becoming. Becoming arises from clinging. Clinging arises from craving. Craving arises from feeling. Feeling arises from contact. Contact arises from sense bases. Sense bases arise from name and form. Name and form arises with consciousness. Consciousness is conditioned by formations. Formations come from ignorance. This reversal is not theoretical, it is practical. It gives us the tools to interrupt the cycle. The moment we become aware of feeling, we can pause. We can notice craving before it becomes clinging. We can see the sense of becoming form before it hardens into identity. We can watch the whole process unfolding and choose not to follow. The chain is not a trap, it's a map. It shows us exactly where freedom can begin. We don't need to dismantle every link at once. One clear moment of mindfulness, one deep breath, one act of letting go can stop the entire chain, because each link depends on the next. Without fuel, the fire goes out. This perspective also shows the impersonal nature of suffering. It's not my craving or my clinging. It is craving conditioned by feeling. clinging arising because of contact. These are natural processes. They unfold according to laws, not because of who we are. And that understanding brings compassion for ourselves, for others, for all beings caught in the same cycle. We also learn to recognize where the momentum builds. Craving often hides behind neutral feeling. Clinging often begins with slight irritation. Becoming sneaks in through subtle thought. The more we refine attention, the more precisely we can interrupt the pattern. Awareness becomes a blade that cuts the link. As practice deepens, we see that ignorance is not only the first link, it is the background of the entire chain. It is present whenever clarity is absent, whenever we identify, whenever we seek permanence. The antidote to ignorance is not knowledge but wisdom, direct insight into dependent origination, into emptiness, into the non-arising of fixed self. And with wisdom, even the chain itself is seen as empty, not as a real cycle, but as a conceptual structure. A teaching device, a skillful means. The links dissolve into immediate experience. There is no need to trace them once the seeing is clear, just the recognition. This is not mine. This is not me. This is not who I am. From this recognition, the mind releases. The heart softens. There is no struggle to change the chain, just the freedom of not feeding it, just the peace of knowing how it works, and no longer believing its story. And so, with each breath, the choice becomes clearer, to follow the link or to see it, to believe the arising or to meet it without clinging. The path is not about controlling experience, but about not being controlled by it. This is the insight of dependent origination in reverse. Not a path to walk, but a pattern to stop. Not a system to memorize, but a structure to see through. And once seen through, there is nothing to dismantle. Only the ease of not building again. In that ease, the path continues, not forward, but here. Not toward a goal, but free from the need for one. Just this moment, seen clearly. Just this arising, unmet by ignorance. Just this experience, without clinging. Just this life, unfolding without self. When the links of dependent origination are traced backward and seen clearly, clinging becomes exposed not as a personal failing, but as a conditioned process, silent, mechanical, always seeking fuel. The cycle continues not because we are bad or broken, but because certain views remain unquestioned. We mistake constructed thoughts for reliable truth. We absorb beliefs and carry them as if they were our own. Even after seeing the chain, even after loosening the grasp of identity, there may still be one subtle form of holding that stays intact, the clinging to views. Clinging to views is the final shape self can take. The mind, having relinquished possession over form, feeling, name, role, and witness, still wishes to assert itself through certainty, through having the right understanding, through identifying with positions. Views offer a kind of safety, a fixed point in a world that constantly shifts. They feel like ground. But when examined, they reveal themselves as burdens. The Buddha did not reject all views. He taught right view as part of the Eightfold Path. But he warned equally about the danger of turning any view into dogma, even views that are technically correct. Right view is a support for liberation, not a flag to wave. When it becomes rigid, it begins to divide. The moment a view is claimed as self or used to compare, defend, or condemn, it transforms from wisdom into weight. Right view is useful only insofar as it leads to less suffering. It's not defined by cleverness or sophistication. It doesn't depend on being well-read or precise in philosophy. Its function is to clarify what leads to craving and what leads to release. Right view begins with recognizing cause and effect, karma and result, and deepens into seeing the emptiness of self and the impermanence of all phenomena. But even these insights are not ends in themselves. They are doors, and every door must be walked through, not turned into a home. Clinging to views shows up in many ways. It can appear as moral superiority, the belief that one's understanding is purer or more developed. It can appear as defensiveness when a long-held belief is questioned. It can appear as the inability to listen fully because the mind is comparing what's heard to what it already thinks is true. These patterns reinforce the sense of self as the one who knows. Views also become part of group identity. A community can wrap itself around a shared perspective, turning it into a badge. This can create cohesion, but it can also breed exclusion. When views harden, the focus shifts from understanding suffering to maintaining the rightness of the view itself. Disagreements become personal. Debate becomes conflict. The view becomes more important than what it was meant to illuminate. Even in solitary practice, the burden of views can grow heavy. The mind may cling to certain ideas about what progress looks like, how insight should feel, or what counts as genuine awakening. These expectations become comparisons. They shape perception, filter experience, and generate subtle forms of striving. The practitioner may begin to doubt their path, not because it's lacking, but because it doesn't match the image shaped by their views. The Buddha's response to this was radical. He remained silent in the face of speculative questions. When asked about the beginning of the world, the fate of the self after death, or the nature of the cosmos, he declined to answer. Not because he didn't know, but because he saw that answering would feed attachment to views. These questions, he said, do not lead to the end of suffering. They are distractions, mental spinning that does not bring freedom. Right view, then, is not about possessing ultimate truth. It is about seeing clearly what causes suffering and what releases it. It is about aligning perception with the nature of reality, not clinging to ideas about that nature. A view is right when it leads to more compassion, more presence, more ease. It becomes wrong the moment it creates division, pride, or resistance. This understanding requires subtlety. We cannot drop all views and become passive or unmoored. Some conceptual structure is needed to walk the path. The mind needs orientation, but we hold those views lightly, knowing they are tools, maps, not the territory. They help us see, but they are not what is seen. There is a distinction between view and belief. A view can be a helpful lens, used consciously, updated when necessary. A belief tends to solidify, turning into identity. The challenge is to notice when a view has become a belief, when we no longer question it, when it begins to define us or create distance from others. That's the moment to pause. Practice deepens when views are treated like temporary scaffolding. They support insight, but they are not insight itself. As understanding grows, the views may shift. They may become more nuanced. Eventually, they may dissolve entirely, not through rejection, but through redundancy. When direct seeing becomes stable, the need for interpretation fades. This process is humbling. It shows us that we don't know as much as we think, that our views, even carefully cultivated ones, are conditioned, that our perception is limited. This is not cause for despair. It is a doorway into openness, into a mind that listens more, defends less, and softens naturally. The absence of fixed views does not mean confusion. It means spaciousness. It means the ability to hold multiple perspectives without being trapped in any of them. It means responding to life from the moment, not from a template. This is where wisdom becomes fluid, adaptable, alive. Clinging to views also blocks intimacy. When we approach others with fixed ideas, we do not meet them. We meet our own concepts. This distances us. We hear what confirms our view and ignore what doesn't. Real connection requires loosening those filters, letting the other person be as they are, letting reality speak for itself. In teaching, the burden of views can become especially heavy. A teacher may feel the need to have the right answer, the right stance, the right language. But teaching is not about transmitting views. It's about pointing to the possibility of direct experience. The most powerful teachings often come from presence, not opinion, from silence, not speech. Letting go of views does not mean becoming indifferent or passive. It means seeing that certainty is often a disguise for fear, that needing to be right is often a reaction to discomfort, that holding tight to a view can prevent us from learning something new, from being touched by something unexpected. When we release the burden of views, the heart relaxes, the mind quiets. There is less internal argument, less need to prove, more space to see things as they are, without distortion. This doesn't mean we stop thinking. It means we no longer mistake thought for truth. This also applies to how we see ourselves. Views about identity, who we are, how far we've come, what our path should look like, can become obstacles. They define, limit, and isolate. But when we see these as just views, not facts, we begin to move more freely. We act with integrity, not from a script. We meet the moment with authenticity, not with a mental image. Right view without clinging is about balance. It is the middle path between skepticism and fanaticism, between blind belief and constant doubt. It is a stance that is grounded but not rigid, clear but not closed. It allows for confidence without arrogance, for commitment without obsession. In practice, we can reflect on our views regularly. Ask, is this view helping me let go, or is it keeping me stuck? Is it opening my heart or tightening it? Is it bringing clarity or creating confusion? These questions don't weaken our path, they strengthen it. They make it more honest. As insight deepens, views naturally fade, not through suppression, but through disuse. When the sun rises, the candle is no longer needed. When awareness becomes steady, concepts become quiet. What remains is knowing that does not divide, understanding that does not cling. This is the fruit of right view rightly held, not a final belief, but a mind unburdened by the need to believe, a mind that meets each moment without armor, a heart that lets go of being right in order to be real. And from this release, the path continues, no longer guided by opinion, but by presence, no longer confined by certainty, but moved by wisdom. Just this breath, just this step, clear, unheld, free. Even after the craving to be someone fades, even after identity begins to dissolve, the mind often doesn't fall silent. It still moves. It still produces, not out of greed, not out of malice, but out of habit. The thinking mind is not trying to cause harm, it simply doesn't know how to stop narrating. The subtle clinging that remains after letting go of form and self is not always about possession or becoming. Sometimes it's the quiet need to explain, to interpret, to frame what is happening in a way that feels known. That's where it begins again. This is the movement the Buddha described as papancha, mental proliferation. It's not just thought, it's the expansion of thought into more thought. One sensation gives rise to 10 reflections. A passing mood becomes a fixed narrative. A small discomfort becomes a cascade of conclusions. The mind doesn't leave anything alone. It doesn't just experience. It comments, it judges, it replays, and in doing so, it keeps building. Most people live within this proliferation without realizing it. They're not choosing to hold on. They're simply not aware that they are constantly adding to what is already here. Thought arises, and instead of passing through, it branches outward. The mind turns what was simple into something dense. A sound becomes a memory becomes a story becomes a wound becomes an identity. It happens in seconds, and before long, the original contact is forgotten. What remains is the construction. This construction is sticky. It draws in the sense of self, the urge to control, the desire to be right. Papancha doesn't just add mental noise. It sustains suffering. It keeps experience personal. It reclaims what was already released. Even in meditation, you may notice it. A sensation arises. There is awareness. And then, thought begins to form. Why is this happening now? I thought I let this go. This again? It starts as observation, but it grows. And it's in that growth that the mind loses its simplicity. The danger of papancha is that it's convincing. The stories feel true. The thoughts seem necessary. They feel like insight. But they're not grounded in clarity. They're rooted in assumption. The mind builds its case before it even sees clearly, and once the structure has formed, it becomes difficult to let go of. You begin to believe that the story is real, that the thought has authority, that the narrative defines you, but it doesn't. The stories are empty. They are born out of habit. The mind is used to connecting things, labeling them, assigning meaning. And it does so automatically, long after the initial impression has faded. When you stub your toe, the pain lasts seconds, but the thoughts that follow can last hours. I shouldn't be so careless. This always happens to me. Why am I so clumsy? That's papancha. That's what keeps the original contact alive far longer than necessary. It's not just unpleasant experiences that proliferate. Pleasant ones do too. You see something beautiful, and the mind begins to plan. I want to come back here. I should take a picture. How can I keep this feeling? And already, the present moment has been turned into a future strategy. The original beauty has passed. What remains is craving. The Buddha taught that papanka arises from perception. Once a thing is known, seen, heard, felt, the mind reacts. It begins to build. It compares. It relates. It searches memory and projects future. And this process happens almost immediately, beneath the surface of conscious awareness. What seems like a single thought is often the result of a long chain of mental events. The reason papanka is so deeply embedded is because it is tied to identity. The narratives are not neutral, they are built around a central character. Me, mine, I am. The mind creates versions of self through commentary. I'm improving. I'm falling behind. I'm doing well today. These are not just observations, they are constructions, and once built, they are protected. Even the story of letting go can become a new identity. That's how clever proliferation can be. To see through this process is not to stop thought. It's to stop believing thought. To recognize when the mind has moved beyond simple knowing into elaboration. It's to catch the moment a comment becomes a conclusion and a conclusion becomes a self. This recognition is the beginning of release. Mindfulness is the tool that reveals this process, not mindfulness as attention alone, but mindfulness with discernment, with interest, with honesty. It's not about fighting thought or silencing the mind, it's about observing its patterns without being pulled into them, watching how a small discomfort becomes a chain of reactivity, seeing how a single sentence from someone turns into a complex internal dialogue. When this becomes visible, the pattern weakens. Equanimity supports this process, because without calm, the mind reacts to its own movement. It judges the proliferation. It gets frustrated by its speed. But when equanimity is present, there's space. You can see thought arise and pass. You can feel the urge to explain and not follow it. You can experience without multiplying. Letting go of papanka doesn't mean never thinking again. It means thinking when needed, but not feeding what is unnecessary. It means resting in direct experience, not getting pulled into elaboration. It means trusting the simplicity of the moment without needing to add more. In early practice, you may notice this proliferation often. That's natural. It's not a failure. The mind is conditioned to spread. But every moment you catch it, every time you return to presence without story, the habit begins to unwind, slowly, gently, not through force, but through understanding. As the tendency to proliferate softens, something else begins to appear. A quiet mind, not dull, not blank, but still, present, enough. A mind that knows without spinning, a heart that feels without clinging. A presence that no longer needs to define, explain, or own what arises. This is where freedom begins, not in silencing the world, but in not adding to it, not in changing thought, but in no longer multiplying it. This is the end of papanka, not through suppression, but through clarity, and from that clarity, something natural unfolds, a kind of peace that doesn't need narration, a kind of joy that doesn't need a reason, a kind of awareness that doesn't build anything new. Just this, simple, quiet, free. You've just taken a long, honest journey through the many layers of letting go, not by pushing things away, but by seeing what never needed to be held in the first place. From the subtle clinging to identity to the trap of wanting even spiritual freedom. From the mind's endless habit of spinning stories to the release found in silence, in simplicity, in not needing answers. You've heard how even beauty, even compassion, even the wish to help can become chains when we hold them too tightly. And yet, you've also seen how none of this means withdrawal from life, but a deeper, freer, more open way of living it. Letting go is not an event. It's not one moment. It's a path. One breath at a time, one thought at a time, one subtle release over and over again until what's left is not emptiness in the cold sense, but a spaciousness filled with presence. If something in these teachings opened your heart or helped you see a pattern more clearly, share it in the comments below. What are you letting go of tonight? What's one view, one fear, one story you're ready to stop holding? And if you'd like more teachings like this, calm, grounded, and real, click subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss a step on the path. You've done enough for today. Rest now. Let go. Let life be as it is. And let the peace you've been chasing meet you in stillness.